Is that really your seat, young man? Let me see that ticket again. Flight attendant Karen Whitfield's voice carried down the aisle of Skylink Airways Flight 847, causing several first-class passengers to look up from their pre-flight routines. Her perfectly manicured finger tapped impatiently on the boarding pass belonging to 12-year-old Marcus Robinson. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in the plush leather seat. Yes, ma'am. 3A. His voice was quiet but steady. He'd been excited about the window seat ever since his dad had surprised him with the tickets last week. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line as she studied the boarding pass for the third time. Her eyes darted between the ticket and Marcus, whose dark skin contrasted against the crisp white collar of his button-down shirt. The first-class cabin of Flight 847 was filled predominantly with business travelers, mostly white, mostly adult, mostly used to certain faces not being among them. And you're traveling alone. Karen's tone suggested this would explain everything. No, ma'am, my dad's just helping an elderly lady with her bags. He'll be right back. Marcus pointed toward the economy section where Dr. Elijah Robinson was assisting an older woman struggling with her overhead luggage. Dr. Robinson's suit jacket was folded neatly on the seat beside Marcus. Karen's eyebrows arched. Your father. The pause before the word was slight but unmistakable. And he's seated here as well. Yeah, in 3B, the aisle seat. Marcus fidgeted with his Nintendo Switch, uncomfortable with her staring. It's a present because of my report card. Around them, the first-class cabin continued its pre-flight routine. A businessman in 2C glanced up from his laptop, frowning slightly at the interaction. Across the aisle, an older couple whispered to each other. In 1A, a woman named Jessica Miller had subtly positioned her phone, its camera lens peeking above her magazine. Karen ran a finger down her passenger manifest. Robinson, she muttered, as though the name itself was suspicious. These premium seats are typically reserved for our Gold Elite members. My dad is Gold Elite, Marcus explained, pointing to the status printed on the boarding pass. He travels a lot for work. Karen's smile didn't reach her eyes. And what exactly does your father do that has him flying so frequently in first class? Before Marcus could answer, Dr. Elijah Robinson appeared in the aisle, his presence commanding immediate attention. At 6'2" with broad shoulders and a calm, authoritative demeanor, he carried himself with quiet confidence. Is there a problem, Dr. Robinson asked, his deep voice measured and professional. Karen straightened her Skylink blazer. Sir, I was just verifying your son's seating assignment. These premium seats are correctly booked and paid for. Dusty Robinson finished smoothly, producing his own boarding pass. I'm Gold Elite with Skylink, flying over 100,000 miles annually for the past 7 years. Karen examined Dr. Robinson's boarding pass with the same scrutiny. And you are both together. The question hung awkwardly in the air. He's my son, Dr. Robinson stated simply, placing a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. We're traveling to Washington, D.C. for a special weekend, his first time visiting the capital. Karen's demeanor shifted slightly. I see. Well, there seems to be a flag in our system regarding your reservation. If you could just wait a moment while I verify something with the gate agent. As Karen retreated to the front of the cabin to use the phone, Marcus looked up at his father. Dad, why does she keep checking our tickets? Dr. Robinson's expression remained neutral, but his eyes reflected a familiar weariness. Sometimes people make assumptions based on what they see rather than what's true. Son. He took his seat beside Marcus, straightening his tie with practiced precision. Don't worry about it. We have every right to be here. 3 rows ahead, Jessica Miller had stopped pretending to read her magazine. Her phone was now openly recording. Escalation, Karen Whitfield returned 5 minutes later, this time accompanied by another flight attendant, a younger Hispanic woman whose name tag read Maria Rodriguez. Karen's smile was tight as she leaned into the aisle. Mr. Robinson, our system is showing some inconsistencies with your reservation. These first-class seats were part of a corporate block booking. Are you affiliated with Westbrook Industries? Her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Dr. Robinson maintained his composure. No, I'm not. I booked these tickets directly through the Skylink app 6 weeks ago. I have the confirmation emails and receipt if you'd like to see them. He reached for his phone. That won't be necessary right now, Karen said quickly. If you could just... A commotion at the back of the plane caught her attention. An elderly passenger was having trouble with her oxygen tank, and Dr. Robinson immediately recognized her as the woman he'd helped earlier. "Excuse me," he said, standing up. "That lady needs assistance. I'm a physician. I should help." Karen seemed reluctant, but nodded. As Dr. Robinson made his way down the aisle, she turned her attention back to Marcus. "So," she said once Dr. Robinson was out of earshot, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "How did you really end up in first class, young man?" Marcus blinked, confused by the question. "My dad bought the tickets for my straight A report card." Karen leaned closer. "These seats cost over $1,200 each. That's quite a gift." "My dad says education matters," Marcus replied simply, gripping his armrest tighter. Karen straightened, her voice rising just enough for nearby passengers to hear. "You know, we take security very seriously at Skylink. Using someone else's frequent flyer account or misrepresenting your travel status is against our policies." Marcus's heart began to erase. "I'm not misrepresenting anything. Those are our seats." The businessman in 2C looked up sharply. "Is there a problem here? The boy's father just went to help someone. I saw him." Karen's smile remained fixed. "Sir, I'm simply following protocol. When passenger details don't match our system flags, we're required to investigate." She turned back to Marcus. "Must be nice sitting up here instead of economy, isn't it? First time in first class?" "No, ma'am," Marcus answered truthfully. "My dad and I flew first class to Chicago last summer for my cousin's wedding." Karen's eyebrows raised in exaggerated surprise. "Did you now on Skylink? United, I think?" Marcus replied, growing increasingly uncomfortable. "I see," Karen's voice dripped with skepticism. "Well, you must be in the wrong section. These seats are reserved for our premium customers." She emphasized the word premium while scanning Marcus's simple jeans and button-down shirt. By now, several passengers were openly watching the exchange. The woman in 1A had been joined by at least two others with phones discreetly recording. Marcus felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment, though he wasn't entirely sure what he'd done wrong. Karen reached for the cabin phone. "I think we need to verify your ticketing status before takeoff. Security concerns, you understand." Within minutes, a uniformed security officer appeared at the front of the first-class cabin. The name badge on his blue shirt read, Thomas Wilson. He was a stocky man with a military-style haircut and a perpetual frown. "What seems to be the issue?" Wilson asked Karen, his eyes immediately finding Marcus. "Possible seat assignment discrepancy," Karen reported officially. "The system flagged this passenger's reservation. His companion claims they're booked correctly, but neither matches our premium passenger profile." Wilson approached Marcus's seat. "Son, I need to see your boarding pass." Marcus handed it over with trembling fingers. "My dad will be back any minute. He just went to help someone." Wilson examined the boarding pass carefully. "Marcus Robinson, seat 3A. Looks legitimate to me." "Check the reservation notes," Karen insisted. "There's a system flag." As Wilson and Karen conferred in hushed tones, the main cabin door closed with a heavy thunk. The plane was preparing for departure, and Dr. Robinson was nowhere in sight. Panic rose in Marcus's throat. "My dad, he's still helping that lady. You can't close the door." "Your father should have remained in his assigned seat during boarding," Karen replied coldly. "That's a basic safety protocol." A new figure appeared from the cockpit, Captain Richard Harmon, his 4 gold stripes gleaming on his shoulders, his silver hair peeking out from under his pilot's cap. "What's the situation?" "Karen," Captain Harmon asked, surveying the scene. "Possible security concern. Captain, flagged reservation, passenger discrepancy, and now his alleged father has left the aircraft." "I'm right here." Dr. Robinson's voice cut through the tension as he returned to the first-class cabin. "The lady needed her medication adjusted. As I mentioned, I'm a physician, and..." Captain Harmon cut him off. "Sir, leaving your seat during critical boarding procedures creates a security risk. We take these matters very seriously at Skylink. I was helping a passenger in medical distress," Dr. Robinson explained calmly. "Surely that's understood." "What's understood," Captain Harmon replied, "is that all passengers must follow crew instructions and remain seated when required." Dr. Robinson nodded respectfully. I apologize if I violated protocol. It won't happen again. That's not the only issue, Karen interjected. There are discrepancies with your reservation. These seats are flagged in our system. Dr. Robinson's expression remained neutral, though Marcus could see the muscle in his jaw tighten slightly, a subtle tell he recognized from the rare times his father was truly angry, but controlling it. What exactly is the discrepancy? Dr. Robinson asked. Public humiliation. Captain Harmon cleared his throat, addressing the first-class cabin with an air of regretful authority. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. We have a security situation that requires immediate attention. This will only take a moment. The phrase security situation sent a ripple of concern through the cabin. Several passengers shifted uneasily in their seats, their eyes darting between the captain and the Robinsons. Security situation, Doctor, Robinson repeated, his voice low but firm. Captain, my son and I are legitimate passengers with confirmed reservations. I'm happy to show you our identification and proof of purchase. Captain Harmon's expression remained impassive. Sir, when our system flags a reservation, we're required to conduct additional verification before departure. It's standard procedure. And what exactly triggered this flag? Dr. Robinson asked. Karen stepped forward, clutching her tablet. Our premium passenger verification system. It helps us ensure our first-class experience meets the expectations of our typical travelers. Her eyes flicked briefly to Marcus. The businessman in 2C muttered something under his breath, shaking his head in disgust. Marcus sat rigid in his seat, hands folded tightly in his lap. His father had talked to him about situations like this before, conversations other 12-year-olds didn't need to have. Still, experiencing it so publicly made his stomach twist into knots. I assure you, Dr. Robinson said, his professional demeanor intact despite the growing tension. We are both legitimate ticket holders for these seats. I've been a Gold Elite member with Skylink for 7 years. Captain Harmon consulted the tablet Karen handed him. Mr. Robinson, Dr. Robinson, he corrected quietly. Robinson, the captain amended without apology. Our system has flagged your reservation for additional security screening. Specifically, we need to verify the minor's travel documentation. My son's documentation. Neither Robinson's eyebrow raised slightly. He's traveling domestically with his father. His boarding pass and my identification should be sufficient. Under normal circumstances, perhaps, Captain Harmon replied. But given the system flag and the unusual nature of your boarding, we're implementing Protocol TS-714. Dr. Robinson's expression changed subtly. I'm not familiar with that protocol. Captain, could you clarify what TS-714 entails? Karen interjected before the captain could respond. It's a security measure for verifying passengers who may have been incorrectly assigned to premium cabins. From across the aisle, Jessica Miller, a pharmaceutical executive based on her lanyard, spoke up. I've been flying Skylink First Class weekly for 3 years, and I've never heard of Protocol TS-714. Captain Harmon turned toward her with a practiced smile. Ma'am, not all of our security procedures are publicized for obvious reasons. I assure you we're following standard Skylink policies. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Phones continued recording discreetly, and some not so discreetly. A middle-aged man in 4B had begun typing rapidly on his phone, his face flushed with what appeared to be anger. So what exactly does this protocol require? Dr. Robinson asked, his hand now resting protectively on Marcus's shoulder. The minor will need to deplane for additional verification. Captain Harmon stated, our ground team will process his documentation while we prepare for departure. Marcus looked up at his father, alarm evident in his eyes. Dad, Dr. Robinson's calm voice belied the intensity in his gaze. You want my 12-year-old son to leave the aircraft without me based on an unspecified system flag. Sir, I understand your concern, Captain Harmon said, though his tone suggested otherwise. You're welcome to deplane with him, but that would mean both of you missing this flight. We have a departure schedule to maintain. I'd like to speak with your ground supervisor, Dr. Robinson requested. This situation requires clarification. That's not possible during boarding procedures, Karen replied quickly. Captain has final authority on all security matters once the cabin door is closed, which it now is, Captain Harmon added pointedly. We need to resolve this situation immediately. Either your son deplanes for proper verification, or both of you will need to exit the aircraft. Jessica Miller spoke again, louder this time. This is ridiculous. I've seen children in first class dozens of times. Why is this boy being singled out? Captain Harmon turned to her, his professional veneer showing cracks of irritation. Ma'am, please allow us to handle this security matter. If you continue to interfere, I'll be forced to consider that a violation of crew instructions. Jessica fell silent, but her phone continued recording. Dr. Robinson took a deep breath, centering himself before speaking. Captain Harmon, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. My son and I are legitimate passengers with valid tickets for these seats. I'm requesting that you contact your ground supervisor to resolve this matter. That's not an option, the captain replied firmly. We have 174 other passengers waiting to depart. Security protocol, TS 714 requires immediate compliance. Your son needs to deplane, or both of you will be removed from this flight. Marcus looked around at the watching eyes, some sympathetic, others coldly curious, many simply uncomfortable. He'd never felt so exposed, so scrutinized, so unmistakably other as he did in this moment. Dad, he whispered, maybe we should just— No, Marcus, Dr. Robinson interrupted gently. We have every right to be here. This is an important lesson. He turned back to the captain. We will both deplane. I'll allow my son to be separated from me based on an unspecified protocol I've never heard of in all my years of air travel. Captain Harmon nodded curtly. That's your decision, sir. Officer Wilson will escort you both to the terminal. Forced removal. Let's make this quick and easy, Officer Thomas Wilson stated flatly. Gather your belongings and follow me to the exit. Dr. Robinson maintained his composure as he helped Marcus collect their carry-on items. The first-class cabin had fallen into an uncomfortable silence, punctuated only by the occasional whisper and the unmistakable sound of phone cameras clicking. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay, Karen announced with rehearsed regret. We'll be resuming our departure sequence momentarily. Thank you for your patience. As Marcus stood to leave, he noticed several emotions playing across the faces watching them. Embarrassment, discomfort, curiosity, and on a few, unmistakable satisfaction. One elderly man refused to meet his eyes, staring determinedly out the window, though there was nothing to see but the terminal wall. Officer Wilson positioned himself directly behind them, close enough that Marcus could smell the coffee on his breath. This way, he directed, gesturing toward the front exit. As they moved through the first-class cabin, Karen stood by the galley with arms crossed and a small, triumphant smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Maybe economy is more your speed anyway, she murmured, just loud enough for Marcus to hear as he passed. The words stung more than he wanted to admit. Marcus kept his eyes forward, remembering his father's oft-repeated advice, never let them see they've affected you. But his cheeks burned with humiliation as they walked the gauntlet of staring passengers. Jessica Miller caught Dr. Robinson's eye as they passed. This isn't right, she said clearly. I'm documenting everything. Robinson nodded gratefully but continued moving. Marcus noticed his father's hand, the one not visible to the officer or flight attendants, was typing something on his government phone, fingers moving with practiced precision without looking at the screen. As they reached the aircraft door, Captain Harmon emerged from the cockpit for a final word. For future reference, Dr. Robinson, Skylink takes security protocols very seriously. Perhaps a review of our policies would be beneficial before your next booking. Robinson met the captain's gaze directly. I assure you, Captain, I am extremely familiar with airline security protocols. In fact, I believe this situation will require its own review. Something in his father's tone made Marcus glance up. Though Dr. Robinson's expression remained professional, there was a certainty in his voice that Marcus recognized, the same tone he used when saying this will be addressed, after Marcus had reported a particularly unfair teacher last year. That teacher had been transferred to administrative duties within a week. As they stepped off the plane onto the jet bridge, Marcus finally gave voice to the question burning inside him. Dad, what did I do wrong? The words came out smaller than he intended, and he immediately wished he could take them back. He was 12, not a little kid, and his father had taught him to be stronger than this. Dr. Robinson stopped walking, turned, and knelt to meet his son at eye level, something he hadn't done since Marcus was 9. His father's eyes, usually so controlled and measured, held a fierce intensity. "You did nothing wrong, Marcus. Nothing. What happened in there was about them, not you. Never doubt that." Officer Wilson shifted uncomfortably behind them. "Sir, we need to keep moving. Terminal security protocols." Dr. Robinson stood, straightening his tie with the same precision he applied to everything in life. "Of course, Officer Wilson, protocol is important, isn't it?" They continued through the jet bridge in silence. As they reached the gate area, the digital display updated with mechanical indifference. Flight 847, Washington, D.C., boarding complete, scheduled depart tweet or 36 minutes. Marcus watched as the gate agent closed the podium computer. Their seats, their legitimately purchased, first-class seats, were now pulling away from the gate without them. "What happens now, Dad?" he asked quietly. Dr. Robinson checked his watch, a simple but elegant timepiece that had been a gift from Marcus's late mother. "Now," he said with unexpected calm, "we document everything." "There's nothing I can do," Terminal Supervisor Miguel Alvarez stated with practiced detachment. "Captain has final authority on all passenger matters once boarding is complete." The bustling Terminal C of O'Hare International Airport continued its normal operations around them, announcements echoing overhead, passengers rushing to gates, the perpetual hum of thousands of conversations melding into ambient noise. At Concourse Supervisor Desk C14, however, time seemed suspended in bureaucratic limbo. Dr. Robinson stood perfectly straight, his carry-on position neatly beside him. "I understand the captain's authority, Mr. Alvarez. What I'm asking is for Skylink's discrimination reporting forms and an incident number for our removal." Miguel's eyes flicked briefly to Marcus, who stood silently beside his father, then back to Dr. Robinson. "Sir, this wasn't discrimination. It was a security protocol implementation. Protocol TS 714 specifically, Quantum," Robinson replied. "Could you please explain that protocol to me? I seem to be unfamiliar with it despite my extensive air travel experience." Miguel tapped something into his computer, frowned slightly, then typed again more slowly. "Our security protocols are proprietary information. Dr. Robinson, I'm not at liberty to discuss the specifics." "Interesting," Dr. Robinson remarked, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. "Because I cannot seem to find any reference to TS 714 in any TSA or FAA documentation. Perhaps you could direct me to the appropriate reference materials." Miguel's expression tightened. "Sir, if you have concerns about your removal, Customer Relations can assist you with filing a general complaint. They'll provide you with a reference number for follow-up." "That won't be necessary," Dr. Robinson replied. He reached into his breast pocket and removed a small leather case. From it, he extracted a business card, simple, government-issued, and placed it on the counter. "I'll need the names of all crew members involved in this incident, copies of our boarding passes, and documentation of any system flags that allegedly triggered Protocol TS 714. Miguel glanced at the card, his expression shifting subtly as he registered the Department of Transportation seal. "Sir, I'm not authorized to—" "You're required to maintain records of all passenger removals," Dr. Robinson interrupted smoothly. "I'm merely requesting copies of those records, which I'm entitled to as the affected passenger." Marcus watched his father with quiet admiration. While other adults might have raised their voices or made a scene, Dr. Robinson operated with surgical precision, calm, focused, and somehow more intimidating because of it, using his government phone. Robinson opened what looked to Marcus like a specialized app, not one available on regular phones. As Miguel continued making excuses, Dr. Robinson systematically documented everything, taking photos of their boarding passes, recording the conversation, making notes with specific timestamps. "Dad," Marcus whispered, "what are you doing?" "Creating an evidence chain," his father replied quietly. "Everything must be documented properly." Miguel observed this documentation process with growing discomfort. "Sir, recording is not permitted in secure areas without authorization." "I'm fully authorized," Dr. Robinson replied without looking up from his device. Federal transportation oversight protocols permit documentation of potential civil rights violations in all public transit facilities. He continued typing, then added, I've noted your objection to standard documentation procedures at 11:43 a.m., along with your employee ID number. Mr. Alvarez? Marcus noticed how Miguel's demeanor had changed. The supervisor was now standing straighter, his previous dismissive attitude replaced with something approaching caution. Perhaps, Miguel suggested, his tone notably more accommodating. You'd prefer to speak with our station manager, Ms. Taylor can probably address your concerns more effectively. That would be appropriate, Dr. Robinson agreed. I'll also need contact information for any witnesses. He gestured toward the gate area where Jessica Miller, the first-class passenger who had spoken up, was standing with her phone still in hand. Miguel nodded quickly. I'll contact Ms. Taylor immediately. Would you like to wait in our premium passenger lounge while I arrange the meeting? No, thank you, Dr. Robinson replied. We'll wait here where the incident occurred. Documentation protocols require maintaining proximity to the scene when possible. As Miguel hurried away, Marcus looked up at his father. Are we in trouble? Dad, Robinson's expression softened as he regarded his son. No, Marcus, we're not in trouble, but some other people might be. Marcus nodded, noticing how different people in airport uniforms were now glancing their way, speaking into radios, and moving with a new sense of purpose around them. Something had changed in the atmosphere, the invisible but unmistakable shift that occurred when people realized they might have made a significant error in judgment. I didn't know your job let you do all this, Marcus observed, gesturing to the government phone with its specialized interface. There's a lot about my work I don't bring home, Robinson replied. But today, it seems my professional life and our personal experience have intersected in a way I didn't anticipate. He placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. I'm sorry this happened, son, but I promise you, it won't go unaddressed. From across the terminal, Marcus could see Miguel returning with a woman in a sharp Skylink corporate uniform. Her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, her expression professionally neutral, but her quick pace betraying her concern. That would be Ms. Taylor, Robinson observed. Remember what I've taught you about these situations? Marcus, observe everything, respond thoughtfully, and remember, documentation is power. Station manager confrontation. Dr. Robinson, I'm Rebecca Taylor, Skylink's Chicago station manager. Her handshake was firm, her smile practiced, but not reaching her eyes. I understand there was an incident aboard Flight 847. I'd like to assure you that Skylink takes customer concerns very seriously. They stood in a small conference room just off the main terminal, a space normally reserved for crew briefings but hastily converted for this meeting. The room's windows overlooked the tarmac where planes taxied with mechanical precision, the world of aviation continuing its choreographed routine despite the disruption to their personal journey. Ms. Taylor, what happened today was not a customer concern. It was a documented case of discriminatory treatment and improper security protocol implementation. Dr. Robinson's tone remained professional but direct. My son and I were publicly humiliated and removed from a flight for which we held legitimate first-class tickets. Rebecca clasped her hands on the table. Dr. Robinson, I've reviewed the preliminary report. Our flight crew made decisions based on established safety protocols. Captain Harmon has over 20,000 flight hours and an impeccable safety record. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. Marcus sat quietly beside his father, observing the subtle dynamics at play. Miss Taylor had yet to make direct eye contact with me, addressing all her comments to Dr. Robinson as though Marcus were merely a piece of luggage rather than the primary target of the incident. Safety protocols, Dr. Robinson repeated. Specifically Protocol TS-714, which was cited as the justification for our removal. I'd like to see the official documentation for that protocol. Rebecca shifted slightly in her seat. As Mr. Alvarez mentioned, our security protocols are proprietary information. Interesting, Dr. Robinson replied, because I'm quite familiar with both FAA and TSA security directives, and I've never encountered Protocol TS-714. Perhaps you could explain its implementation criteria. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Rebecca's professional facade. Dr. Robinson, Our priority today is addressing your immediate needs. We can rebook you and your son on the next flight to Washington, provide meal vouchers for your inconvenience, and offer 2 complimentary round-trip tickets as goodwill compensation. Dr. Bauer Robinson opened a leather portfolio that Marcus recognized, the one his father used only for his most important work. I'm not interested in vouchers or complimentary tickets. Ms. Taylor, I'm requesting Form SL-1F57D for discrimination reporting, Form SL-1F90 for improper removal documentation, and Form SL-223 for security protocol misapplication. Rebecca blinked, clearly surprised by his specific knowledge of Skylink's internal forms. Those forms are typically processed through our customer relations department at corporate headquarters. Federal transportation regulations require that they be made available at all primary service locations. Dr. Robinson corrected her. O'Hare certainly qualifies as a primary location for Skylink, considering it's one of your 3 major hubs. Marcus watched Miss Taylor's confidence visibly erode. His father wasn't yelling or making threats. He was simply demonstrating a level of knowledge that clearly exceeded what she had anticipated from a displaced passenger. I'll need to consult with our compliance team regarding those specific forms, Rebecca said finally. In the meantime, perhaps we could focus on getting you and your son to Washington. We have a flight departing in 2 hours. Ms. Taylor, Dr. Robinson said, his voice measured. I don't believe you understand the severity of what occurred today. A Skylink captain cited a non-existent security protocol to remove a 12-year-old African-American child from a flight for which he held a legitimate first-class ticket. This occurred after your flight attendant, Ms. Whitfield, subjected him to repeated questioning about his right to be in first class, despite clear documentation proving his legitimate status. Rebecca's eyes widened slightly. I'm sure race had nothing to do with... I haven't finished. Dr. Robinson interrupted calmly. During this incident, Ms. Whitfield made several comments suggesting that Marcus and I didn't belong in first class. She questioned the legitimacy of my status as his father, and Captain Harmon fabricated a security protocol to justify our removal when I requested supervisor intervention. For the first time, Rebecca looked directly at Marcus. Is this accurate, young man? Before Marcus could answer, Robinson placed a protective hand on his shoulder. My son is a minor and a victim in this situation. He won't be interrogated again. The incident was recorded by multiple passengers, including Ms. Jessica Miller in seat 2D, who has provided me with her contact information and video documentation. Rebecca swallowed hard. Dr. Robinson, I apologize if our staff created an uncomfortable situation. Skylink does not condone discrimination of any kind. I'm sure this was a misunderstanding about reservation details or... Ms. Taylor, Robinson cut in, his patience visibly thinning. I'm not here to debate whether discrimination occurred. I'm here to document it properly through your company's required reporting mechanisms. I'll need those forms I requested, along with the names and employee identification numbers of all staff involved in the incident. Sir, I'm trying to help resolve this situation, Rebecca insisted, her professional demeanor starting to crack under pressure. Then provide the forms. Dr. Robinson replied simply, That's the only resolution I'm seeking at this moment. Rebecca glanced toward Miguel, who had been standing silently by the door. Mr. Alvarez, could you please check on the status of Dr. Robinson's request for our customer incident forms? As Miguel nodded and left the room, Marcus noticed his father discreetly checking his watch. For the first time since they'd been removed from the plane, Marcus realized his father wasn't just responding to events, he was operating according to some kind of plan. Ms. Taylor, Dr. Robinson continued once Miguel had gone, I should inform you that I've already documented this incident through federal channels. I'm giving Skylink the opportunity to address it properly through your internal mechanisms before escalation becomes necessary. Federal channels, Rebecca repeated, her voice rising slightly. Sir, while I understand your frustration, involving federal authorities in a routine boarding issue seems excessive. Robinson smiled thinly. It stopped being routine when your captain invented a security protocol as justification for removing a child based on his appearance. At that point, it became a civil rights matter with potential federal implications. The conference room fell silent except for the muffled announcements from the terminal outside. Marcus could almost see Ms. Taylor recalculating her approach, reassessing the situation and the man sitting across from her. Dr. Robinson, she said finally, her voice carefully controlled. What exactly is it that you do for the Department of Transportation? Before his father could answer, a sharp knock at the door interrupted them. Miguel returned, looking decidedly uncomfortable, with a tablet in hand. Ms. Taylor, he said quietly, there's an urgent matter requiring your attention. Rebecca excused herself and stepped outside with Miguel. Through the conference room's glass wall, Marcus could see their conversation growing increasingly animated. Miguel was pointing at something on the tablet, and Rebecca's normally composed expression had transformed into one of barely concealed alarm. Dad, Marcus whispered. What's happening? Dr. Robinson straightened his tie, a habitual gesture Marcus had observed whenever his father was preparing for something significant. The system is beginning to work, son. Sometimes justice requires patience and proper channels. When Rebecca returned, her demeanor had completely transformed. The confident, slightly dismissive station manager had been replaced by someone markedly more attentive and concerned. Dr. Robinson, she said, her voice now carrying a distinct note of deference. I have those forms you requested ready for your completion. I've also taken the liberty of arranging private transportation to Washington, D.C. via our corporate partner aircraft, departing whenever you're ready. Additionally, senior leadership from our corporate headquarters would very much appreciate speaking with you at your earliest convenience. Marcus looked up at his father, who showed no surprise at this sudden change in treatment. Instead, Robinson simply nodded as though this were precisely what he had expected all along. The forms first, Miss Taylor, he replied calmly. Documentation before accommodation. That's how proper systems function. The strategic patience. This is Dr. Robinson. I need to invoke Protocol 47B at Ord Terminal. His father's voice was calm but carried an authority that made the person on the other end respond immediately. Though Marcus couldn't hear the reply, he could see his father's expression remain steady as he continued. Yes, full documentation. Code red review required. They sat in a private waiting area of Terminal C, the same leather portfolio open on Dr. Robinson's lap as he made a series of increasingly important phone calls. With each call, the responses seemed to grow more urgent, the tone of the conversations more serious. Marcus watched, fascinated by this side of his father he'd never fully witnessed before. At home, Dr. Robinson was simply Dad, the man who helped with science projects, who insisted on proper grammar at the dinner table, who patiently taught him chess and tennis and how to change a tire. This Dr. Robinson, however, moved through systems and protocols with the precision of a surgeon, each word carefully selected for maximum effect. Third call coming up, his father murmured, almost to himself. This is where it escalates to federal level. The third call was different from the others. Dr. Robinson stepped slightly away, his voice lowered as he said, Cross-department response during the FAA and DOT jurisdictions. Yes, I'm invoking executive authority under Section 39C. Marcus couldn't hear the response, but he saw his father's expression shift subtly, a small nod of satisfaction that most people would have missed. Authentication code Robinson 7728 Delta Echo. His father continued. Full oversight activation, effective immediately. As Dr. Robinson concluded the call, the atmosphere in the terminal seemed to shift. Security personnel who had been casually patrolling suddenly appeared more focused, their movements more deliberate. Airline staff at various gates were checking their computers with increased urgency, several speaking rapidly into phones or radios. Dad, Marcus asked quietly, what's happening? Robinson returned to his seat beside Marcus. Systems take time to activate, son. Like dominoes, you set them up carefully, then watch them fall in sequence. Before Marcus could ask for clarification, 3 official-looking individuals in suits approached their waiting area. The woman leading them carried a leather credential wallet similar to the one Marcus had seen his father use occasionally. Dr. Robinson, she said formally, I'm Special Agent Diana Ortiz, Transportation Securities Administration. We received your Protocol 47B activation. Her eyes moved briefly to Marcus, her expression softening momentarily before returning to professional neutrality. Is this the minor involved in the incident? Yes, my son Marcus, Dr. Robinson confirmed. He was the primary target of the discriminatory actions by Skylink personnel. Agent Ortiz nodded. We'll need your full statement, and we've already requested all surveillance footage from the gate and aircraft cameras. Terminal Supervisor Miguel Alvarez has been temporarily relieved pending investigation. Marcus watched with growing amazement as more officials arrived, some in uniform, others in business attire, all moving with purpose and deference toward his father. Dad, he whispered, how do all these people know you? Dr. Robinson placed a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. They don't necessarily know me personally. Son, they know my position and what it represents. A man in a pilot's uniform with executive epaulets approached next, his face a mask of controlled concern. Dr. Robinson, I'm Jason Matthews, Skylink Chief Pilot for O'Hare Operations. I want to personally assure you that Captain Harmon's actions are being reviewed immediately. We've already pulled Flight 847's cockpit voice recordings and cabin surveillance. Marcus noticed how everyone was suddenly treating them with extraordinary respect, the same people who had dismissed their concerns less than an hour ago. Rebecca Taylor reappeared, now accompanied by a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit. Dr. Robinson, this is Anthony Reynolds, Skylink's Regional Vice President. He's flown in from our headquarters specifically to address this situation. Reynolds extended his hand. Dr. Robinson, I cannot adequately express how seriously we're taking this incident. I've been briefed on the preliminary details, and I want to assure you that this is receiving our highest priority attention. Dr. Robinson shook the man's hand with professional courtesy but limited warmth. Mr. Reynolds, I appreciate Skylink's sudden interest in our experience. I look forward to seeing how this translates into meaningful action. The subtle emphasis on sudden wasn't lost on anyone present. Reynolds nodded solemnly. You have my personal guarantee that this will be addressed at the highest levels of our organization. As the executives continued their apologies, Marcus noticed Thomas Wilson, the security officer who had escorted them off the plane, standing awkwardly nearby, his expression now decidedly uncomfortable. Dr. Robinson, Wilson said hesitantly, approaching after the Skylink executive stepped away for a consultation. I want to apologize for my role in this incident. I was following what I believed were legitimate protocols, but I should have questioned the captain's directives more thoroughly. For the first time since their removal from the aircraft, Marcus saw his father's professional veneer crack slightly, a flash of genuine anger quickly controlled. Officer Wilson, you removed a 12-year-old child from an aircraft based on a fabricated security protocol without verifying its legitimacy. That's not just a procedural error, it's a fundamental failure of your responsibilities as a security professional. Wilson looked stricken. Sir, your apology is noted. Dr. Robinson continued, his voice level but intense. But apologies don't correct systemic failures. I suggest you cooperate fully with the federal investigation that's now underway. As Wilson retreated, Marcus tugged gently on his father's sleeve. Dad, all these people, did you know this would happen? Dr. Robinson's expression softened as he looked at his son. Not exactly like this. No. But I did know that proper documentation and following the correct protocols would trigger an appropriate response. Before Marcus could ask another question, Agent Ortiz returned with a tablet. Dr. Robinson, we've retrieved the preliminary surveillance footage from Flight 847. Would you like to review it before we proceed with formal statements? Dr. Robinson nodded. Yes, though I'd prefer my son not relive the experience through video. Perhaps there's somewhere he could wait comfortably. Of course, Ortiz replied. We have a junior agent who could keep him company in our office just down the concourse. There's a gaming system and snacks available. Marcus began to protest. He was 12, not a little kid who needed distractions, but something in his father's expression made him reconsider. This wasn't about his age, it was about protecting him from unnecessary additional stress. That would be fine, Marcus agreed. But Dad, will you tell me what happens after? Every detail that matters, Dr. Robinson promised. Sometimes, Marcus, the most important lessons come from difficult experiences. Today you're learning how systems work, both when they fail and when they're properly activated to correct those failures. As a friendly young TSA agent arrived to escort Marcus to their office, he glanced back at his father, now surrounded by airline executives, federal agents, and security personnel, all focused intently on his words. In that moment, Marcus realized he was seeing not just his dad, but Dr. Elijah Robinson, a man whose authority extended far beyond their home and whose quiet power was only now becoming fully apparent. The hidden authority. The Department of Transportation takes its oversight responsibilities very seriously. Ms. Taylor. Dr. Robinson's voice carried through the now crowded conference room as he displayed his official credentials. As Director of Aviation Safety Enforcement, I'm authorized to implement immediate compliance reviews when safety protocols are misrepresented or abused. Marcus, having returned from his brief stay at the TSA office, sat quietly beside his father, watching the color drain from Rebecca Taylor's face as the full reality of the situation became clear. Director of Aviation Safety Enforcement, she repeated, her professional composure crumbling. I wasn't aware, your reservation didn't indicate. My travel arrangements are intentionally nondescript for security reasons, Dr. Robinson explained, a practice that ironically contributed to today's incident. Captain Harmon decided I didn't look right for first class and invented a security protocol to justify our removal. Anthony Reynolds, the regional vice president, cleared his throat. Dr. Robinson, I want to personally assure you that Skylink does not condone discrimination in any form. This incident represents a profound failure of our values and procedures. Values and procedures are meaningless without accountability. Mr. Reynolds, Dr. Robinson replied. Captain Harmon cited Protocol TS-714 as justification for removing my son from the aircraft. That protocol does not exist in any FAA or TSA documentation, which means he knowingly falsified security information, a federal violation that carries significant penalties. The room had grown increasingly crowded as various officials arrived, TSA agents, FAA inspectors, airport security personnel, and Skylink executives of increasing seniority. Marcus observed how they all deferred to his father, whose calm authority seemed to expand to fill the space. Security Officer Wilson, who had escorted them off the plane, approached with visible hesitation. Dr. Robinson, I want to apologize again. I should have verified the protocol instead of taking the captain's word. Yes, you should have. Dr. Robinson agreed without emotion. Security officers are required to confirm protocol codes before implementation, especially when they involve the removal of passengers. Your failure to do so contributed to a significant civil rights violation. Wilson nodded miserably. I understand, sir. I've already provided my statement to the TSA investigators. Marcus watched the proceedings with fascination. The same people who had dismissed them hours ago now scrambled to demonstrate their cooperation and concern. The transformation was as complete as it was revealing. Special Agent Ortiz approached with a tablet. Dr. Robinson, we've secured all the surveillance footage, including cabin video from Flight 847. It clearly shows Ms. Whitfield's discriminatory treatment of your son and Captain Harmon's invention of Protocol TS-714. We've also collected statements from 12 passengers who witnessed the incident, including Ms. Jessica Miller, who provided her own video recording. Robinson nodded. Excellent. Please ensure all evidence is properly logged for the compliance investigation. Yes, sir. The FAA oversight team has already initiated a Level 1 review of Skylink's security compliance procedures. Marcus listened as his father seamlessly shifted from victim to authority figure, directing a complex federal response with the ease of someone accustomed to navigating bureaucratic systems. The same quiet confidence that Marcus had always known at home now operated on a much larger stage. Dad, Marcus whispered during a brief lull in the activity, why didn't you just tell them who you were on the plane? Wouldn't that have stopped everything? Robinson turned to his son, his expression thoughtful. That's an excellent question. Marcus, I could have identified myself immediately, but that would have addressed only our situation. By documenting the incident properly and following federal protocols, we've triggered a systematic review that will help prevent this from happening to others who don't have my position or authority. Marcus considered this. So it's not just about us. It rarely is, his father replied. Systems only improve when their failures are properly documented and addressed. Your experience today, painful as it was, will help create better protocols and training for everyone. Rebecca Taylor approached again, her earlier confidence replaced by visible anxiety. Dr. Robinson, Captain Harmon and Flight Attendant Whitfield have been removed from duty pending investigation. They're being brought back to O'Hare immediately for questioning. Good, Dr. Robinson replied. I'll want to review their statements once they've been processed. Of course, sir. And about your travel arrangements, we've prepared our corporate jet for your journey to Washington, D.C. whenever you're ready to depart. Dr. Robinson shook his head. That won't be necessary. We'll take a commercial flight once this situation has been properly documented. I don't require special accommodation, just equal treatment under established protocols. The message wasn't subtle, and Rebecca nodded her understanding. Yes, sir. We've reserved seats on flight 952, departing at 3:15 p.m., if that's acceptable. As Rebecca walked away, Marcus noticed Jessica Miller, the passenger who had spoken up on their behalf, being escorted into the conference room by a TSA agent. Dr. Robinson, she said, extending her hand. Jessica Miller, I was in first class when this happened. I've provided my video to the agents, but I wanted to check personally that you and your son are okay. We appreciate your concern, Miss Miller, Zaha Robinson replied, shaking her hand, and thank you for speaking up during the incident. Too often, people remain silent when witnessing injustice. Jessica smiled at Marcus. Your father was incredibly composed throughout the entire situation. I was impressed by his dignity under such difficult circumstances. Marcus nodded. My dad always says that keeping calm is the best way to solve problems. Your dad is very wise, Jessica agreed, and apparently very important, judging by all the officials who arrived after you left the plane. Robinson smiled modestly. Just someone who believes in proper procedures and accountability. As Jessica excused herself to complete her statement, Marcus observed the continuing activity around them. Federal agents reviewing evidence, airline executives in urgent consultations, security personnel providing statements. The machinery of oversight and accountability was in full motion, all triggered by what had seemed just hours ago, like a simple case of discrimination that would likely go unaddressed. Sometimes the best response is patient documentation. Marcus repeated his father's earlier words. I think I understand that better now. Robinson squeezed his son's shoulder gently. That's right, Marcus. In a world where injustice often goes unchallenged, documentation is power. Remember that lesson, no matter what path you choose in life. Parrot Wheat 3, immediate consequences. The single call. Robinson stepped away from the crowded conference room, gesturing for Marcus to join him in a quiet corner of the airport terminal. Around them, the normal rhythms of O'Hare continued, passengers rushing to gates, announcements echoing overhead, luggage carts beeping as they navigated through crowds. There's one more call I need to make, Dr. Robinson explained, removing his personal phone rather than his government device. This is the call that will determine the full scope of the response. Marcus watched as his father scrolled through contacts and selected a name, Director Ramirez. The phone rang twice before being answered. Director Ramirez, this is Elijah. I'm invoking Emergency Safety Directive 87. His father's voice was calm but carried unmistakable gravity. The response on the other end was immediate, though Marcus couldn't hear the specific words. Yes, I'm at O'Hare with my son. Robinson continued. We were removed from Skylink Flight 847 under a falsified security protocol designated as TS-714. Captain Richard Harmon explicitly cited this non-existent protocol as justification for removing a 12-year-old passenger from first class. There was a pause as the person on the other end responded. That's correct. Full compliance audit of all Skylink operations. Effective immediately. Dr. Bayou Robinson's tone remained measured, but his eyes reflected the seriousness of what was transpiring. The captain knowingly fabricated a security protocol that constitutes a Level 1 safety violation under 49 CFR 175.402B. Another pause, longer this time. Yes, I've already implemented Protocol 47B locally. TSA and FAA personnel are on site conducting preliminary assessment per Regulation 352.16. But given the deliberate falsification of security measures by flight crew, I believe this warrants the more comprehensive response outlined in Emergency Safety Directive 87. Dr. Robinson listened intently for nearly a minute before responding. I agree completely. Director, the systemic implications cannot be overlooked. When flight crews feel empowered to invent security protocols for discriminatory purposes, it represents a fundamental breakdown in safety culture as defined in the Aviation Safety Reporting System guidelines. A final exchange followed, and Dr. Robinson's expression shifted subtly, the slight nod of someone receiving confirmation of a significant decision. Thank you, Director Ramirez. I'll oversee the initial implementation here at O'Hare. Please keep me updated on the broader response. He ended the call and turned to Marcus. It's done. What's done, Dada? Marcus asked, noting the unusual solemnity in his father's expression. A necessary response to ensure accountability. Robinson replied, when systems fail this fundamentally, the correction must be equally significant. Before he could elaborate, Agent Ortiz approached with renewed urgency. Dr. Robinson, we've just received the directive from FAA headquarters. All Skylink operations are being placed under immediate safety review. Every aircraft in their fleet is being held in position pending initial compliance verification. Marcus's eyes widened. Every aircraft, the whole airline. Dr. Robinson nodded. 147 planes across 83 airports. To be precise, when a captain invents security protocols to discriminate against passengers, it raises fundamental questions about the airline's entire safety culture. As if to confirm his words, the terminal's announcement system crackled to life. Attention all Skylink passengers. Due to a federal safety compliance review, all Skylink departures are temporarily suspended. Passengers should remain at their gates for further information. We appreciate your patience during this safety procedure. Marcus watched in astonishment as the nearby departure boards began changing in sequence, dozens of Skylink flights shifting from on-time to delayed in a cascading display of digital dominoes. Dad, he whispered, did your call do all this? Dr. Robinson placed a hand on his son's shoulder. The call didn't cause this. Marcus, Captain Harmon's decision to falsify security protocols caused it. The call merely ensured the appropriate response. Around them, the airport's rhythm had changed. Skylink gate agents were suddenly surrounded by confused passengers. Airport staff moved with increased urgency. Security personnel had taken up positions near Skylink counters, anticipating potential conflicts as travelers learned of the delays. Rebecca Taylor rushed toward them, her face pale with shock. Dr. Robinson, did you... She struggled to form the question. Ms. Taylor, Skylink is now under a Level 1 federal safety compliance review. Robinson explained calmly. When your captain fabricated security protocol TS-714, he triggered automatic safety oversight provisions. Falsifying security measures is considered a critical safety violation under federal transportation regulations. But the entire airline, Rebecca's voice was barely above a whisper. Safety culture is systemic. Dr. Robinson replied. If one captain feels empowered to invent security protocols, it suggests a fundamental failure in training and oversight. The review will determine how widespread these practices might be. Agent Ortiz approached again, her expression reflecting the gravity of the unfolding situation. Dr. Robinson, we're receiving reports from multiple airports. All Skylink aircraft have been issued ground stop orders. Planes already in flight will continue to their destinations, but will then be held for inspection. The initial economic impact analysis suggests approximately $75.3 million in immediate operational costs, not including customer compensation requirements. Marcus watched his father absorb this information with the same calm demeanor he'd maintained throughout the entire ordeal. There was no satisfaction in Dr. Robinson's expression, no vindication, only the serious focus of someone ensuring proper procedures were followed. The timing is exactly 37 minutes since our removal from the aircraft, Dr. Robinson noted, checking his watch. Please document that in the official timeline. As Agent Ortiz nodded and stepped away, Marcus tugged gently on his father's sleeve. Is this what you expected to happen? Dr. Robinson considered the question thoughtfully. I expected an appropriate systemic response to a serious safety violation. The scope is determined by established protocols, not personal preference. That's how proper oversight works. Across the terminal, Marcus could see passengers gathering at information screens, many talking animatedly into phones or taking photos of the sudden wave of delays. News was spreading rapidly, though few would yet understand the full context of what had triggered such an unprecedented response. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "Now," his father replied, "we observe how systems correct themselves when properly activated. It's an important lesson in accountability." As they stood watching the consequences of that single phone call ripple through the national aviation system, Marcus realized he was witnessing something few people ever saw: the invisible machinery of oversight and regulations suddenly made visible through decisive action. The same father who had taught him to tie his shoes and ride a bike had just ground a major airline to a halt with a single phone call. All because someone had decided Marcus didn't belong in first class. Operational meltdown begins. "Attention all Skylink passengers, all departures temporarily suspended. Please remain at your gates for further information. We apologize for the inconvenience." The announcement echoed through terminals across the country, from O'Hare to Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson, from Dallas/Fort Worth to Miami International. In every airport where Skylink operated, digital boards displayed the same message beside dozens of flights: delayed federal safety review. From their final point in O'Hare's Terminal C, Marcus and Dr. Robinson could see the immediate local impact. Gate agents surrounded by questioning passengers, supervisors rushing between counters, and the normally smooth rhythm of airport operations fracturing into pockets of confusion and concern. "Dad, look at the boards," Marcus said, pointing to the main departure screen where nearly a third of all listed flights now showed delays. All of them Skylink. Dr. Robinson nodded. "This is what systematic accountability looks like, Marcus. When critical safety protocols are compromised, the response must be equally comprehensive." Agent Ortiz approached with a tablet displaying live updates from across the aviation network. "Dr. Robinson, we're tracking the operational impact. Skylink aircraft at 83 airports nationwide are currently holding position. That's 147 planes carrying approximately 23,780 passengers now experiencing delays." Marcus's eyes widened. All those people deserving a safe travel environment with properly trained crew members. His father completed gently. "Short-term inconvenience to ensure long-term safety is a reasonable trade-off." On the tablet, Agent Ortiz showed them a map of the United States with dozens of pulsing red dots, each representing a Skylink aircraft now holding position under federal order. "The compliance teams are being deployed to major hubs first: Atlanta, Dallas, Chicago, Miami, and Los Angeles will have inspectors on site within the hour." At Gate C-17, where Flight 847 had departed without them, a new scene was unfolding. The aircraft had been ordered to return to O'Hare immediately after reaching cruising altitude, creating confusion among passengers who had witnessed the Robinsons' removal just an hour earlier. "The captain's receiving the return order now," Agent Ortiz reported, listening to updates through her earpiece. "They're being instructed to maintain radio silence regarding the reason for return until federal personnel can meet the aircraft." Marcus imagined Captain Harmon's face upon receiving those instructions. The gradual realization that his casual decision to invent a security protocol had triggered consequences far beyond a simple passenger removal. In the Airport Operations Center, visible through glass walls across the terminal, dozens of personnel moved with urgent purpose. Phones rang continuously. Radios crackled with tense communications, and supervisors huddled around monitoring stations displaying the cascading disruptions to the national air traffic system. "Chicago approach. This is Skylink 847, requesting priority return to O'Hare under federal directive." Captain Harmon's voice echoed through the operations center's speakers, his previously confident tone now edged with uncertainty. Across the country, similar scenes played out as Skylink's operations ground to a halt in Atlanta. 15 Skylink aircraft remained frozen at their gates, jetways still attached, passengers increasingly restless as minutes stretched into an hour with no departure clearance. At Dallas/Fort Worth, Skylink's second largest hub, operations managers struggled to process the federal grounding order, initially believing it to be a system error until FAA officials arrived in person to confirm the directive. In Miami, a Skylink aircraft that had just pushed back from the gate was ordered to return, causing ripple effects through the carefully choreographed ground movements of dozens of other flights. The tablet in Agent Ortiz's hand continued updating with real-time information. Dr. Robinson, we're seeing significant social media activity around the grounding. Hashtag Skylink grounded is trending nationally, and several news outlets are dispatching crews to major airports. Dr. Robinson reviewed the information without visible emotion. Please ensure that Public Affairs is preparing an appropriate statement. This is about safety compliance, not personal grievance. That distinction should be clear in all communications. Back at Gate C-17, the jetway reconnected to Flight 847 as it returned to O'Hare. Through the large windows, Marcus could see passengers looking confused and concerned as federal agents boarded the aircraft. Karen Whitfield's face was visible briefly at the aircraft door, her previously smug expression replaced by one of growing alarm as she recognized the seriousness of what was unfolding. They're securing the cockpit voice recordings and flight data, Agent Ortiz explained. Captain Harmon and Miss Whitfield will be escorted to separate interview rooms for formal statements. Marcus watched the methodical federal response with fascination. What had begun as a simple case of discrimination had evolved into a massive operational intervention that was now affecting tens of thousands of travelers nationwide. Yet there was no chaos, no panic, just the systematic implementation of established protocols triggered by his father's single call. I had no idea your job could do all this, Marcus said quietly. Dr. Robinson smiled slightly. Aviation safety depends on absolute integrity of protocols. Marcus, when a captain invents security measures for personal reasons, it undermines the entire foundation of our safety system. The response must be proportionate to that threat. On the operations screens, Skylink's stock price had begun to move, trading algorithms detecting the unusual pattern of nationwide delays before any official announcement had been made. In the first 15 minutes of the grounding, shares had already dropped 3%, representing millions in market value evaporating with each passing minute. Dr. Robinson of Agent Ortiz said, checking her tablet again. Skylink's CEO Gregory Patterson has been notified of the situation. He was in a meeting with investors in New York and is now en route to their operational headquarters. Initial estimates suggest the airline is losing approximately $75,000 per minute during this ground stop. Marcus did the quick mental math, a skill his father had encouraged, and blinked at the result. That's $4.5 million an hour, he whispered. Economics often drives compliance where ethics should have been sufficient, Dr. Robinson observed. Unfortunately, sometimes financial consequences are necessary to ensure safety priorities are properly aligned. As they watched the operational meltdown continue to spread across the national aviation system, Marcus couldn't help but reflect on the stark contrast between their current situation and where they had been just hours ago. Humiliated and removed from an aircraft for nothing more than existing in a space where others had decided they didn't belong. Dad, Marcus said thoughtfully, is this what you meant by strategic patience? Dr. Robinson placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. Exactly, Marcus. When faced with injustice, immediate reaction rarely creates lasting change. Strategic documentation and proper channels can trigger systemic corrections that extend far beyond our personal situation. The announcement system crackled again, this time with a more detailed message. Attention all Skylink passengers, due to a federal safety compliance review. All Skylink operations are currently suspended. We anticipate this review will continue for several hours. Passengers may rebook on alternative carriers or request a full refund. Skylink representatives are available at all ticket counters to assist with arrangements. We apologize for this disruption to your travel plans. In that moment, watching the consequences of discriminatory actions unfold across the national aviation system, Marcus began to understand a fundamental truth his father had tried to teach him for years. True power wasn't in emotional reactions or personal confrontations. It was in knowing how systems worked and having the patience to activate them properly. Corporate chaos. What do you mean all our aircraft are grounded? That's impossible. Gregory Patterson's voice carried through the speakerphone in the Skylink Emergency Operations Center. The airline's CEO had been pulled from an investor presentation in New York, where he'd been outlining the company's expansion plans and projected revenue growth for the coming fiscal year. The operations center, a glass-enclosed command post within Skylink's headquarters, had transformed from routine monitoring to crisis management in a matter of minutes. Screens that normally displayed smooth progressions of flights now flashed with alarming red indicators. 147 aircraft frozen across the country, thousands of passengers stranded, and a rapidly escalating financial impact ticker that already showed losses exceeding $18 million in just the first hours. It's a Level 1 Federal Safety Compliance Review, sir, explained Michael Dawson, Skylink's Chief Operations Officer, his normally composed demeanor showing signs of stress. The directive came directly from FAA headquarters, implemented through Emergency Safety Directive 87, ESD 87. That's the nuclear option. Patterson's voice reflected his disbelief. That's only supposed to be activated for systemic safety failures that pose imminent threats to passengers. What the hell happened? Through the speakerphone, they could hear Patterson's hurried movements, presumably gathering his things to rush to the airport for an emergency flight back to headquarters. Sir, the triggering incident involved Captain Richard Harmon on Flight 847 from Chicago to DIC, Dawson explained, choosing his words carefully. He cited a non-existent security protocol, TS-714, to remove a passenger from the aircraft. That passenger turned out to be the 12-year-old son of Dr. Elijah Robinson. A heavy silence followed, broken only by the continuous alerts and notifications sounding throughout the operations center as the situation continued to unfold. Elijah Robinson, Patterson finally said, his voice noticeably quieter, Director of Aviation Safety Enforcement at the Department of Transportation. That Elijah Robinson. Yes, sir, the same. Jesus Christ. The sound of Patterson collapsing into a chair came through the speakerphone. Harmon invented a security protocol to remove Elijah Robinson's son from a flight. Please tell me you're joking. I'm afraid not, sir. Initial reports suggest it was a discriminatory incident. The boy was seated in first class with a legitimate ticket. Flight attendant Karen Whitfield questioned his presence there repeatedly, and when Dr. Robinson requested supervisor intervention, Captain Harmon cited Protocol TS-714 as justification for removal. A protocol that doesn't exist, Patterson clarified, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Correct, sir. Dr. Robinson has invoked ESD 87, which triggers automatic grounding of our entire fleet pending safety culture verification. The financial impact is already significant and growing by the minute. On the main display, the real-time financial impact counter continued its relentless climb, $19.4 million, $19.5 million, $6 million. What's the stock doing? Patterson asked, the businessman in him emerging through the shock. Dawson glanced at another screen. Down 7% and still falling. Trading volume is 4 times normal. The algorithms picked up the unusual pattern of groundings before any public announcement. Of course they did, Patterson muttered. And the media, it's breaking across all major outlets now. CNN has a live shot from O'Hare showing our aircraft returning to gates. Social media is exploding with passenger complaints and speculation. Hashtag Skylink discrimination and hashtag protocol TS-714 are both trending nationally. Through the glass walls of the operations center, Dawson could see Skylink's legal team rushing into an adjacent conference room, arms full of documents, faces grim with the recognition of what lay ahead. Where is Robinson now? Patterson asked. Still at O'Hare, sir. He's overseeing the initial federal response personally. We've offered our corporate jet and numerous apologies, but he's declined special accommodation. He's insisting on standard protocols being followed precisely. Patterson's bitter laugh carried through the speakerphone. Of course he is. That's exactly who Robinson is, a procedure and protocol purist. The one person in the entire federal oversight structure who would have both the authority and the inclination to shut down an entire airline over a fabricated security protocol. Sir, our legal counsel advises that we may be facing significant liability beyond the operational costs, Dawson added. The discriminatory nature of the incident could trigger additional civil rights investigations and penalties. Over one passenger removal, Patterson's voice rose in frustration. This is completely disproportionate. One captain makes a bad call, and we lose our entire operation. Skylink's general counsel, Amanda Chen, who had been listening quietly from the side of the room, finally spoke up. With respect, sir, they removed the son of the man who literally wrote our safety certification requirements, and they did it by inventing a security protocol that doesn't exist. which constitutes a federal violation that calls into question our entire safety culture and training program. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the continuing alerts from monitoring systems tracking the cascading operational failures across Skylink's network. "How bad is this going to get?" Patterson finally asked, his voice notably subdued. Dawson exchanged glances with the crisis management team before responding. "Sir, based on standard procedures for ESD 87 implementation, we're looking at a minimum 24-hour ground stop for our entire fleet, followed by phased return to service only after compliance verification at each hub. Preliminary financial impact estimates suggest $75.3 million in direct operational costs, not including potential regulatory fines, civil liability, or market valuation losses. All because Harmon couldn't tolerate a black kid in first class," Patterson said, the reality of the situation finally sinking in fully. "Where is he now?" "Captain Harmon and flight attendant Whitfield are being interviewed separately by federal investigators," Amanda Chen reported. "Our legal team has offered representation, but given the nature of the violations, we may need to consider distancing the company from their actions." Patterson's sigh was audible through the speakerphone. "I'm on my way back. Have the executive team assembled by the time I arrive. And someone get me a direct line to Robinson. We need to contain this before it destroys us completely." "Sir," Amanda Chen interjected carefully, "Dr. Robinson has indicated he's not interested in special resolution. He's insisting on the full compliance review process being followed. Given his position and authority, I strongly advise against attempting to circumvent established procedures." The financial impact counter continued its relentless climb. 2 million dollars. 21, $3 million. 21, $4 million. "One passenger removal," Patterson repeated incredulously. "One captain's bad decision. And now we're hemorrhaging millions by the hour." "And one captain's decision that revealed a potential systemic failure in our safety culture," Amanda corrected gently. "That's how the FAA will view it, sir. And that's exactly what ESD 87 was designed to address. As the corporate chaos continued to unfold in Skylink's headquarters, none of them yet realized that this was merely the beginning of a transformation that would reshape not just their airline, but potentially the entire industry's approach to training, compliance, and accountability. The truth emerges. "Mr. Patterson, this is FAA Director Maria Ramirez." The voice on the secure line was calm, but carried unmistakable authority. "I understand you've been briefed on the situation involving Skylink Flight 847. Gregory Patterson, now seated in the Crisis Management Center at Skylink's headquarters after a hastily arranged private flight, gripped the phone tightly. Around him, executives and legal counsel watched with tense expressions, the gravity of the situation reflected in their postures. "Director Ramirez, yes, I've been briefed," Patterson replied, struggling to maintain his own composure. "While I understand the seriousness of any protocol violation, the scale of this response seems proportionate to a Level 1 safety violation involving falsification of security protocols." Director Ramirez finished firmly. "Mr. Patterson, when a Skylink captain invents a non-existent security protocol to remove a passenger, it raises fundamental questions about your airline's training, oversight, and safety culture." Patterson closed his eyes briefly, the financial impact display now showing losses exceeding $32 million in just the first 4 hours of the grounding. "Director, I assure you that Captain Harmon's actions do not reflect Skylink's policies or values. This appears to be an isolated incident that's precisely what the compliance review will determine," Ramirez interrupted. "Whether this represents an isolated failure or a symptom of systemic problems in your safety culture." A momentary silence fell before Patterson asked the question that had been consuming him since he'd first heard the name. "Director Ramirez, about Dr. Robinson, is there any possibility of discussing a more targeted response that wouldn't require grounding our entire fleet?" The silence on the other end lasted long enough to make Patterson's stomach tighten with apprehension. "Mr. Patterson," Director Ramirez finally responded, her tone noticeably cooler. "Dr. Robinson is one of our most respected safety oversight professionals. He has implemented Emergency Safety Directive 87 precisely as regulations require. Any attempt to circumvent that process would only extend the grounding and potentially trigger additional enforcement actions." Patterson nodded reflexively, though Ramirez couldn't see him. I understand. We're fully cooperating with all aspects of the compliance review. Excellent, because you should be aware that this isn't merely about discrimination, though that aspect is deeply troubling. The critical safety violation occurred when Captain Harmon falsified a security protocol. That action undermines the entire foundation of aviation safety. Amanda Chen, Skylink's general counsel, slid a note across the table to Patterson. He glanced down to read, "Don't mention special treatment or overreaction. Robinson literally wrote ESD 87 protocols." Patterson swallowed hard. "Director Ramirez, we take this matter extremely seriously. Our team is already reviewing all security protocol training, materials, and implementation procedures." "That's a good start," Ramirez acknowledged. "But the compliance review will be comprehensive, examining everything from crew training to management oversight to corporate culture. Dr. Robinson has provided detailed documentation of the incident, including passenger recordings that clearly show discriminatory treatment followed by protocol falsification." Another note from Amanda. 12 passenger videos already submitted as evidence. Social media coverage expanding rapidly. Patterson felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. "We understand the gravity of the situation. Director, what's our best path forward at this point?" "Complete transparency and cooperation," Ramirez replied without hesitation. "My team will require access to all training records, crew communications, and operational protocols. Any attempt to minimize or obfuscate will only prolong the grounding and increase potential penalties." "Of course," Patterson agreed quickly. "You'll have our full cooperation." As the call concluded, Patterson looked around at his executive team, their expressions reflecting the dawning recognition of just how serious the situation had become. "So," he said after a moment, "we removed Elijah Robinson's son from first class by inventing a fake security protocol." Michael Dawson nodded grimly. "Captain Harmon claims he believed TS 714 was a legitimate protocol for verification of premium cabin seating assignments." "That's not even plausible," Amanda Chen interjected. "Security protocols don't govern cabin assignments, and inventing protocol designations is explicitly forbidden in our own operations manual. Page 273, Section 4. 2. Patterson ran a hand over his face. "What are we hearing from Harmon and Whitfield directly?" Amanda's expression tightened. "That's another problem. Their initial statements are contradicting each other. Whitfield claims she was following Harmon's instructions regarding protocol TS 714, while Harmon insists Whitfield was the one who identified a security concern that required his intervention. They're turning on each other," Patterson observed. "More importantly," Amanda continued, "neither is acknowledging the discriminatory aspects of their actions. Despite clear video evidence, Whitfield is recorded saying, 'Maybe economy is more your speed anyway,' as the Robinsons were leaving the aircraft." The head of Skylink's HR department, Jonathan Rivera, who had been silently taking notes, finally spoke up. "Sir, we've reviewed Ms. Whitfield's personnel file. There are 3 previous passenger complaints alleging biased treatment, all filed within the last 18 months. None were formally investigated beyond initial supervisor review." Patterson's eyes widened slightly. 3 previous complaints. Why wasn't this flagged for more serious intervention? Jonathan shifted uncomfortably. "Her performance metrics otherwise exceeded standards, and her supervisor determined the complaints were subjective in nature." "Subjective," Patterson repeated flatly. "And now we're $35 million into an operational meltdown because those subjective complaints weren't properly addressed." He turned to Amanda. "What are we looking at in terms of liability?" Amanda didn't need to consult her notes. Worst-case federal civil rights violations, which carry potential penalties of up to $25,000 per occurrence. Civil liability for discrimination under both federal and state statutes. Potential class action if the investigation reveals a pattern of similar incidents. Shareholder litigation for failure to properly train and supervise employees, resulting in material financial damage to the company. "Jesus," Patterson muttered. "All because Harmon and Whitfield couldn't accept a black kid in first class." "Sir," Michael Dawson interjected, "there's something else you should know. Dr. Robinson's son was in first class because he'd received straight A's on his report card. It was a celebration gift from his father. That detail is now circulating on social media, along with video clips from the incident. Patterson closed his eyes briefly, the public relations nightmare expanding exponentially with each new detail. A straight-A student being rewarded by his father, and we removed him using a fabricated security protocol because he didn't look right for first class. The optics couldn't be worse, Amanda confirmed quietly. An African-American child, academically gifted, being humiliated for the crime of occupying space reserved for what Karen called our premium customers. No, well, Patterson agreed. They really couldn't. He straightened in his chair. Decision made. All right, here's what we do. Full transparency, full cooperation, and no attempts to minimize what happened. We own this failure completely, implement whatever changes the FAA requires, and make appropriate restitution to the Robinsons. Though I suspect Dr. Robinson is more interested in systemic corrections than personal compensation. Amanda nodded. Based on his reputation and actions so far, that's a reasonable assessment. Dr. Robinson has built his career around improving aviation safety systems, not pursuing personal grievances. Patterson looked again at the financial impact display, now showing losses approaching $38 million, with stock trading down 9% and still falling. The irony, he said quietly, is that if Harmon and Whitfield had simply treated that child with basic human dignity, the respect any passenger deserves regardless of age or race, none of this would be happening. Instead, we're facing potentially the most expensive act of discrimination in aviation history. Around the table, the executive team nodded solemnly, the truth of their situation now inescapably clear. One captain's decision to falsify a security protocol had exposed weaknesses in their entire operational culture, triggering a system-wide accountability mechanism that couldn't be circumvented with phone calls, legal maneuvers, or corporate influence. In that moment, they all understood that Skylink would never be the same airline again, and perhaps that was exactly as it should be. Public relations nightmare. The video you're seeing was recorded just hours ago aboard Skylink Flight 847, the CNN anchor explained as shaky footage played on screens across the country. It appears to show a 12-year-old African-American boy being questioned about his presence in first class before being removed from the aircraft along with his father. The clip, captured by passenger Jessica Miller, had been shared with major news outlets and was now playing on a continuous loop across broadcast and cable networks. The footage clearly showed Karen Whitfield's skeptical questioning, Captain Harmon's invention of Protocol TS-714, and the Robinsons' dignified exit from the aircraft under security escort. In Skylink's Emergency Communications Center, Olivia Parker, the airline's chief communications officer, watched in growing horror as the story exploded across all media platforms simultaneously. It's everywhere, Tukma, she reported to the crisis management team. #Skylink discrimination is the #1 trending topic nationally. Jessica Miller's original video has 1.7 million views in just the first hour. We've received media inquiries from 42 news organizations so far, including all major networks and international outlets. The Communications Center's monitoring screens displayed a real-time analysis of social media sentiment, a sea of red indicators showing overwhelmingly negative reactions spreading virally across platforms. Gregory Patterson rubbed his temples, the beginnings of a migraine forming behind his eyes. What are people saying, specifically? Olivia glanced at her tablet. The main narratives emerging are discriminatory treatment based on race, abuse of authority by the captain, and most damagingly, the revelation that the child was a straight-A student being rewarded with a first-class trip by his father, who happens to be a federal aviation safety director. That last part is particularly resonant on social, added Daniel Fernandez, Skylink's social media manager. The juxtaposition of a child being rewarded for academic excellence, being humiliated by airline staff, has created an emotional response that's driving unprecedented sharing rates. Comments like, "They punished a black child for excelling and success while black is still threatening to some people" are getting thousands of likes and shares. Patterson nodded grimly. And our customer service channels, overwhelmed, Olivia confirmed. Call volume is 340% above normal capacity. We're seeing mass cancellations across the system, even on flights not immediately affected by the grounding. Customers are explicitly citing the discrimination incident as their reason for canceling. On one of the monitoring screens, Footage now showed Skylink planes parked at gates across multiple airports, an unusual sight in the middle of a busy travel day. Captions explained the unprecedented grounding of an entire carrier's fleet due to a critical safety protocol violation. The economic impact is accelerating, Michael Dawson reported, checking the latest figures. Beyond the direct operational costs, we're now seeing booking rates drop by 62% for flights over the next 30 days. Corporate travel managers for several major accounts have contacted us to express concern about their continuing relationship with Skylink. Patterson turned to Amanda Chen. Do we have any legal grounds to contain the video distribution? Amanda shook her head firmly. None whatsoever. The recordings were made legally by passengers in a public setting. More importantly, attempting to suppress the videos would only amplify the narrative that we're trying to hide discriminatory behavior rather than address it. What about Harmon and Whitfield? Have they made any public statements? We've instructed them to refrain from any public or social media comments, Amanda replied. But Whitfield's personal Facebook profile has already been identified by online researchers. They've found several posts from the past 2 years that could be interpreted as showing racial bias. Patterson closed his eyes briefly. Of course they have. He turned back to Olivia. What's our best response strategy at this point? Olivia looked down at her notes before meeting Patterson's gaze directly. Complete transparency and accountability. Attempting to minimize what happened will only extend the damage. We need to acknowledge the failure, accept full responsibility, outline specific corrective actions, and make appropriate restitution, both to the Robinsons and to our broader commitments to diversity and inclusion. Draft a statement along those lines. Patterson agreed. But run it by legal first. I don't want us making commitments we can't fulfill or admissions that create additional liability. Amanda interjected. Actually, sir, I recommend we accept full liability explicitly. The evidence is overwhelming, and attempting to parse responsibility will only prolong the negative coverage. A clear admission and commitment to specific reforms would position us better for eventual recovery. As they debated response strategies, another screen showed live coverage from O'Hare, where passengers were lining up at Skylink counters seeking rebooking on other carriers. The camera zoomed in on a family wearing Black Excellence t-shirts who had just torn up their Skylink boarding passes before walking to a competitor's counter. Sir, Daniel reported, checking his monitoring tools. We're seeing organized campaigns forming online, calling for boycotts of Skylink. Several civil rights organizations have issued statements condemning the incident and calling for federal investigation, which is already underway, Amanda noted dryly. Though the public doesn't yet know the full extent of Dr. Robinson's role in aviation safety enforcement, Patterson raised an eyebrow. Is that likely to emerge? Almost certainly, Olivia confirmed. Journalists are already researching Robinson's background. His position isn't classified. It will become part of the narrative within hours, if not sooner. As if on cue, one of the monitors showing MSNBC changed to a split screen with an aviation expert being interviewed remotely. The caption beneath him read, Dr. Elijah Robinson, Director of Aviation Safety Enforcement, DOT. Skylink couldn't have chosen a worse passenger to discriminate against, the expert was saying. Drs. Robinson quite literally wrote the protocols for aviation safety compliance enforcement. The fact that they invented a fake security protocol to remove his son demonstrates an astonishing failure of judgment and training. Patterson watched the coverage with a growing sense of inevitability. So in addition to the moral failure of discriminating against a child and the operational failure of inventing a fake security protocol, we managed to do this to the one person in the entire federal system with both the authority and the expertise to implement the most severe possible response. That sums it up, yes, Amanda confirmed. The financial impact counter continued its relentless climb, $57.4 million, $57.5 million, $57.6 million. Sir, Olivia said, checking her tablet again. We're getting reports that Captain Harmon and flight attendant Whitfield have been escorted back to O'Hare for formal questioning. There's footage of them being led through the terminal, circulating online now. The image appeared on one of the monitoring screens, Captain Harmon in his uniform and Karen Whitfield in her Skylink blazer, both being escorted by federal agents through a gauntlet of cameras and smartphones. Their expressions revealed the dawning recognition of just how serious their actions had become. They're realizing it now, Patterson observed quietly, that this isn't going away with an incident report and a passenger voucher. Sir, Daniel interjected, Dr. Robinson and his son have been spotted returning to Gate 17. It appears that federal officials are bringing Captain Harmon and Mrs. Whitfield there as well. They're going to face them directly, Amanda realized. With federal oversight present, Patterson straightened in his chair. I need to be there. This has gone beyond crisis communications and legal strategy. This requires direct executive accountability. Amanda nodded. I agree, but I strongly advise against attempting to minimize the incident or offer special accommodation. Based on everything we know about Dr. Robinson, he's seeking systematic corrections, not personal concessions. I understand, Patterson replied, already standing. Have the corporate jet prepared. I need to be at O'Hare within the hour. As the crisis team mobilized to arrange his travel, Patterson took one final look at the monitoring screens, the videos of Marcus Robinson's dignified composure as he was removed from the aircraft, the grounded Skylink planes sitting idle at gates across the country, and the financial impact counter that continued its relentless climb toward what would ultimately become the most expensive act of discrimination in the airline's history. In that moment, Patterson understood that Skylink was facing more than a public relations nightmare. It was experiencing a fundamental reckoning that would either transform the company or potentially destroy it completely. The return to Flight 847. Captain Harmon, I need you to explain the security basis for Protocol TS-714. Federal Aviation Inspector Maria Vasquez's voice was calm but unyielding as she stood at Gate 17 where Flight 847 had returned under federal order. Captain Richard Harmon, his uniform still crisp but his confidence visibly diminished, shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny of multiple federal agents, airport officials, and the steady gaze of Dr. Elijah Robinson. I believed it was a legitimate protocol for passenger verification, Harmon replied, his voice notably less authoritative than it had been hours earlier on the aircraft. Interesting, Inspector Vasquez responded, consulting her tablet. Because there is no protocol TS-714 in any FAA, TSA, or Skylink security documentation. Could you explain where you learned about this non-existent protocol? The gate area had been cleared of regular passengers, but through the large windows, dozens watched the proceedings from the concourse, some filming with phones, others simply witnessing the unprecedented accountability session unfolding before them. Karen Whitfield stood several feet from Captain Harmon, her Skylink blazer now looking slightly rumpled. Her earlier superiority replaced by evident anxiety as she faced her own federal questioning. Ms. Whitfield, continued another inspector, you stated to the young passenger that economy might be more his speed. What factors led you to make that assessment about a child holding a valid first-class ticket? Karen's eyes darted around, seeking support that wasn't coming. I was concerned about possible fraud. The reservation seemed unusual. Unusual in what way? The inspector pressed. His father is a Gold Elite member with over 100,000 flight miles annually for 7 consecutive years. Both tickets were properly purchased and validated. What specific indicators suggested potential fraud? Karen fell silent, the implication of the question hanging in the air between them. Marcus stood beside his father, observing the proceedings with remarkable composure for a 12-year-old who had been the target of such public humiliation just hours earlier. He noticed how the same people who had dismissed them now seemed almost desperate to demonstrate their cooperation with the federal investigation. Dr. Robinson maintained his characteristic calm, neither gloating over the dramatic reversal nor showing anger toward those who had discriminated against his son. His focus remained entirely on the systematic documentation and accountability process, exactly as he had explained to Marcus earlier. Captain Harmon, Inspector Vasquez continued, I need to clarify something fundamental. You do understand that creating fictional security protocols is a federal violation that carries potential criminal penalties. Correct? Harmon paled visibly. I didn't create it. I believed it was established procedure for removing passengers who don't match your personal vision of who belongs in first class, the inspector finished bluntly. From the periphery of the gate area, Jessica Miller watched with satisfaction. Her video of the incident had helped trigger this response, and she had returned to provide formal testimony about what she'd witnessed. Ms. Miller, an agent approached her. We appreciate your documentation of the incident. Your video provides clear evidence of both the discriminatory treatment and the protocol falsification. I couldn't just watch it happen, Jessica replied. The way they treated that child was inexcusable. Meanwhile, Marcus observed the careful, methodical way the federal team was building their case, asking precise questions, documenting responses, establishing a clear timeline of events. It reminded him of how his father approached problems at home, systematic, thorough, and focused on facts rather than emotions. "Dad," Marcus whispered, "are they going to lose their jobs?" Robinson considered the question thoughtfully before answering. "That's not my decision to make. Son, the investigation will determine appropriate consequences based on established procedures. What matters is that the system holds people accountable when they abuse their authority." Marcus nodded, understanding that his father was teaching him something important about justice, that it wasn't about personal vengeance, but about proper processes and systematic corrections. As the questioning continued, a commotion at the terminal entrance caught everyone's attention. Gregory Patterson had arrived, accompanied by several Skylink executives. His expression was grave as he approached the federal inspection team. "Mr. Patterson," Inspector Vasquez acknowledged, "we appreciate your prompt response to this situation." "Of course," Patterson replied, his tone somber. "Skylink takes this matter with the utmost seriousness." He turned to Dr. Robinson and Marcus. "Dr. Burt Robinson, I want to personally express my profound regret for what you and your son experienced today. There is no excuse for how you were treated, and I assure you that Skylink will address this failure completely and transparently." Robinson nodded slightly, but offered no immediate absolution. "Mr. Patterson, I appreciate your acknowledgement. However, my concern extends beyond our personal experience to the systematic failures it represents. When a captain feels empowered to invent security protocols for discriminatory purposes, it suggests profound problems in training, oversight, and corporate culture." "I understand completely," Patterson agreed, "and you're absolutely right. This incident has revealed failures that require comprehensive correction." Marcus watched this exchange with interest, noting how his father maintained his focus on systems rather than seeking personal accommodation or special treatment. "Mr. Patterson," Inspector Vasquez interjected, "we'll need access to all training records for Captain Harmon and Ms. Whitfield, along with Skylink's complete security protocol implementation procedures and any previous incidents involving protocol citations." "You'll have full access to everything you need," Patterson assured her. "Skylink will cooperate completely with the investigation." As the executive conferred with federal officials, Marcus noticed Captain Harmon watching him with an unreadable expression. When their eyes met, the captain quickly looked away, whether from shame, regret, or simply discomfort. Marcus couldn't tell. Karen Whitfield seemed to have shrunk into herself. The confident authority she'd projected earlier now completely evaporated in the face of formal accountability. She stood slightly apart from the others, isolated not just physically, but seemingly aware for the first time of the gravity of her actions. "The federal investigation will be thorough," Dr. Robinson explained quietly to Marcus. "They'll examine not just this incident, but whether it represents a pattern of similar behavior. They'll review training procedures, corporate policies, and implementation practices." "All because of what happened to us?" Marcus asked. "No," his father corrected gently. "All because we documented it properly and activated the appropriate oversight systems. That's the difference between an isolated incident and systemic change. Marcus, documentation and proper channels." Patterson approached them again after conferring with his team. "Dr. Robinson, we've arranged alternative transportation to Washington for you and your son. Our corporate jet is—" "That won't be necessary," Dr. Robinson interrupted politely but firmly. "Standard rebooking on a commercial flight will be sufficient. We don't require special accommodation, just equal treatment under established policies." Patterson nodded, clearly understanding the point being made. "Of course, we've reserved seats on flight 952, departing at 3:15, first class, as you originally booked." "That will be fine," Dr. Robinson agreed. "Though our primary concern remains the systemic corrections needed to prevent similar incidents for passengers who don't have federal positions." "Absolutely," Patterson concurred. I've already directed our team to begin a comprehensive review of all training materials and protocol implementation procedures. This will not happen again at Skylink. As Patterson stepped away to confer further with his executives, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary transformation they'd witnessed in just a few hours. From being dismissed and removed to watching as an entire corporation scrambled to address the failures their experience had revealed. "Dad," he said thoughtfully, "this is what you meant about systems correcting themselves when properly activated. Isn't it?" Robinson smiled slightly, genuine pride evident in his expression. "Exactly. Marcus, individual reactions might feel satisfying in the moment, but systematic responses create lasting change. That's the difference between emotion and strategy, between venting frustration and solving problems." Marcus nodded, understanding more clearly than ever before why his father approached injustice the way he did, not with outbursts or threats, but with calm documentation and methodical activation of proper channels. In that moment, watching federal agents meticulously building their case while airline executives scrambled to contain the damage, Marcus realized he was learning perhaps the most important lesson of his young life, that true power wasn't loud or flashy but methodical and patient, working through established systems to create accountability that extended far beyond individual incidents. The digital display above Gate C-17 showed the time exactly 2 hours and 17 minutes since their removal from Flight 847. In that short span, an entire airline had been grounded, millions of dollars had been lost, and corporate executives had flown in from across the country, all because someone had decided a black child didn't belong in first class and had invented a security protocol to remove him. The lesson couldn't have been clearer: dignity maintained in the face of discrimination, combined with strategic documentation and proper channels, could trigger consequences more powerful than any emotional reaction ever could. Parrot Weed 4, the resolution. Federal intervention. The Federal Aviation Administration is implementing a comprehensive safety compliance review of Skylink Airways following a Level 1 protocol violation at O'Hare International Airport this morning. The official statement scrolled across news tickers nationwide as inspection teams deployed to Skylink facilities across the country. In a spacious conference room at O'Hare's administration building, Dr. Robinson sat at the center of an unprecedented federal response. Around him, representatives from multiple agencies coordinated the systematic review of Skylink's operations, training procedures, and safety culture. "We've deployed inspection teams to all 11 Skylink hubs," reported Senior FAA Inspector James Wilson. "Initial assessments show similar protocol implementation inconsistencies at 3 locations already. Sir, at Dallas/Fort Worth, we found an incident where gate agents cited a non-existent TF-319 protocol call to deny boarding to an elderly couple last month. Atlanta shows 4 documented cases of protocol citation without verification in the past quarter." Dr. Robinson nodded, making notes in his government tablet. "Ensure that all inspection teams are using the standardized evaluation matrix from FAR 175.46C. We need consistent assessment metrics across all facilities." Marcus sat beside his father, observing the proceedings with fascination. What had begun as their personal experience had transformed into a massive federal operation involving hundreds of inspectors, compliance officers, and aviation safety specialists. Gregory Patterson entered the conference room, accompanied by Anthony Reynolds and several other Skylink executives. Their expressions reflected the gravity of the situation as they took seats across from Dr. Robinson. "Thank you for meeting with us. Dr. Robinson," Patterson began, "I want to start by offering a personal apology to your son. Marcus, no child should experience what you did today. There is no excuse for how our employees treated you, and I am deeply sorry." Marcus, somewhat surprised to be addressed directly, nodded politely. "Thank you, sir," Patterson continued, turning back to Dr. Robinson. "We've initiated an internal review of all security protocol training and implementation procedures. Captain Harmon and Flight Attendant Whitfield have been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of both your investigation and our internal review." "That's appropriate," Dr. Burt Robinson acknowledged. "However, our primary concern extends beyond individual accountability to systemic failures. When a captain feels empowered to invent security protocols, it suggests fundamental problems in your safety culture." Anthony Reynolds leaned forward. "We agree completely, Dr. Robinson. That's why we're proposing a comprehensive remediation plan that goes well beyond this specific incident. He slid a document folder across the table. Dr. Robinson opened it, reviewing the contents methodically while the executives waited in tense silence. "This is a good starting point," Dr. Robinson finally commented. "However, it focuses primarily on diversity training rather than the critical safety violation, the falsification of security protocols. While the discriminatory aspects are certainly concerning, the safety implications of invented protocols represent an even more fundamental breach." Patterson nodded. "You're absolutely right. We'll expand the remediation plan to address both dimensions with equal rigor." As the discussion continued, Marcus observed how his father maintained his focus on systems and procedures rather than punitive measures against individuals. There was no hint of personal vindictiveness in his approach, only a methodical insistence on proper protocols and comprehensive corrections. "Mr. Patterson," Dr. Robinson said after reviewing additional documentation, "I appreciate Skylink's willingness to address these issues. However, I want to be clear that the Federal Compliance Review will proceed according to established procedures. There are no shortcuts or expedited processes available, regardless of the financial impact on your operations." "We understand," Patterson replied solemnly, "and we're prepared to accept whatever measures the review determines are necessary to ensure full compliance." Throughout the meeting, Marcus noticed how different people kept glancing at him, some with sympathy, others with something approaching awe that this 12-year-old had inadvertently triggered such a massive federal response. But Marcus remained composed, following his father's example of dignity and restraint. As the meeting concluded, Patterson approached Marcus directly while Dr. Robinson conferred with the inspection team leaders. "Young man," Patterson said quietly, "I want you to know that what happened today will change our entire airline. Sometimes it takes a difficult moment like this to reveal problems that have been hidden in plain sight." Marcus considered this thoughtfully. "My dad says systems only improve when their failures are properly documented and addressed." Patterson smiled slightly. "Your father is a wise man, and you showed remarkable composure today under very difficult circumstances." After the Skylink executives departed, Dr. Robinson rejoined his son. "What did Mr. Patterson say to you?" "He said what happened today will change their airline," Marcus replied, "and that I showed good composure." Robinson nodded approvingly. "You did, Marcus. I'm very proud of how you handled yourself throughout this situation." "I was just following your example, Dad," Marcus said honestly. "That's the highest compliment you could give me." His father replied with a rare smile. "Now, let's observe how the federal response continues to unfold. There's still much to learn from this process." Throughout the afternoon, Marcus witnessed the systematic implementation of aviation safety oversight, teams deploying to inspect aircraft, review training materials, interview flight crews, and evaluate compliance systems. The machinery of federal regulation, normally invisible to most citizens, had been activated in response to their experience and was now operating at full capacity. "Dad," Marcus asked during a quiet moment, "will all of this really make a difference for other people? People who don't have your position or authority?" Robinson considered the question thoughtfully before answering. "Yes, Marcus, it will. Systems improve incrementally through documented failures and formal corrections. What happened to us today will become a case study in protocol implementation, crew training, and discrimination prevention. The next child who boards a flight will benefit from the changes triggered by your experience, even if they never know your name." Marcus nodded, understanding the broader significance of what they were witnessing. This wasn't just about their personal vindication. It was about systematic improvements that would benefit countless future travelers who might otherwise have faced similar discrimination without the benefit of federal intervention. As the day progressed, the scope of the federal response continued to expand. Additional inspection teams were deployed to Skylink training facilities. Documentation reviews revealed other instances of protocol misapplication, though none as egregious as inventing a non-existent security measure. By evening, the first phase of the compliance review had been completed, allowing limited Skylink operations to resume at select hubs under enhanced federal oversight. The airline would begin the slow process of returning to normal operations, but with fundamental changes to its training, compliance, and accountability systems. Gregory Patterson returned for a final briefing. his expression reflecting both exhaustion and resignation. Dr. Robinson, the initial compliance review has identified 17 procedural deficiencies requiring immediate correction. We've accepted all findings without contest and have already begun implementing the required changes. That's commendable, Dr. Robinson acknowledged. The systematic approach you're taking now will serve Skylink well in rebuilding both operational integrity and public trust. As Patterson turned to leave, he paused to address Marcus once more. Young man, I want you to know that your dignity throughout this ordeal has taught everyone at Skylink an important lesson about character. I hope that someday you'll consider flying with us again, though I would certainly understand if you chose not to. Marcus glanced at his father, who nodded slightly, encouraging him to respond as he saw fit. Mr. Patterson, Marcus said thoughtfully, my dad always says that systems are more important than individuals. If your airline fixes its systems properly, I wouldn't have any reason not to fly with you again. Patterson seemed genuinely moved by this response. That's an extraordinarily mature perspective. Thank you, Marcus. After Patterson departed, Dr. Robinson placed a hand on his son's shoulder. That was perfectly stated. Marcus, you've understood exactly what matters most in situations like this. Systematic corrections rather than personal grudges. Marcus smiled, warmed by his father's approval. I had a good teacher. As they prepared to leave for their rescheduled flight to Washington, D.C., Marcus reflected on the extraordinary day they'd experienced, from humiliation and removal to federal intervention and systematic change. Though the discrimination they'd faced had been painful, the response it had triggered would ultimately benefit countless passengers who would never know the story behind the improved protocols and training they would experience. That, Marcus realized, was perhaps the most important lesson of all. That justice wasn't always about personal vindication, but about creating lasting improvements that extended far beyond individual experiences. It was a lesson he would carry with him long after the details of this remarkable day had faded from public memory. The human element. Did it hurt your feelings when they made you leave the plane? The question came from Marcus's 9-year-old cousin, Zoe, as they sat on the balcony of their hotel room in Washington, D.C. The following evening. The family had gathered for the weekend trip as originally planned, though with an unexpected story to share. Marcus considered the question carefully. Adults had been asking him about procedures, documentation, and systems all day, but no one had asked about his feelings quite so directly. Yeah, he admitted quietly. It did. Not because of leaving the plane, but because of how they looked at me, like I didn't belong there, even though I had the right ticket. Like I was doing something wrong just by sitting in that seat. Zoe nodded solemnly, swinging her legs beneath her chair. That's not fair. No, it wasn't, Marcus agreed. But Dad handled it in a way that will help make sure it doesn't happen to other kids. Inside the hotel suite, Dr. Robinson was explaining the situation to Marcus's aunt and uncle, his measured tones occasionally drifting through the open balcony door. Marcus could tell from his father's careful phrasing that he was focused on the systematic response rather than the emotional aspects of their experience. Later that evening, after Zoe had fallen asleep watching cartoons, Dr. Robinson joined Marcus on the balcony. The Washington Monument was visible in the distance, illuminated against the night sky. The trip they had planned as a special reward for academic excellence finally realized, albeit a day later than intended. You've been very patient through all of this, Marcus, his father said, settling into the chair beside him. How are you feeling about everything that happened? The question surprised Marcus slightly. His father typically focused on actions and responses rather than feelings. I'm okay, Dad. It was uncomfortable when it was happening, but watching how you handled it afterward was actually kind of amazing. Robinson smiled slightly. I want you to understand something important. Son, it would have been completely natural and justified for you to feel angry, hurt, or humiliated by how you were treated. Those feelings would have been valid. Marcus nodded slowly. I did feel those things, especially when that flight attendant, Ms. Whitfield, kept checking my ticket over and over like I must have stolen it or something. I noticed that, his father acknowledged, and I saw how well you maintained your composure despite that provocation. That takes remarkable strength of character. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city lights below. Dad, Marcus finally asked, why didn't you yell or get angry even when they were so wrong? I know some of my friends' parents would have. Robinson considered the question thoughtfully. Anger can feel satisfying in the moment, Marcus, but it rarely achieves lasting results. By remaining calm and documenting everything properly, we triggered a systematic response that will create changes extending far beyond our personal situation. But didn't you feel angry inside? Marcus pressed. His father's expression changed subtly, and for the first time, Marcus glimpsed the emotion his father had carefully controlled throughout the entire incident. Yes, Dr. Robinson admitted, his voice momentarily tighter. When I saw how they were treating you, questioning your right to be there, making you feel less than, I felt a rage so deep it was almost physical. He paused, collecting himself. Your mother and I talked many times about how to prepare you for these moments. She always worried. He trailed off, and Marcus understood the unspoken reference to his mother, who had passed away when he was 7. This was a rare moment of vulnerability from his father, whose composure rarely cracked. But I've learned, Dr. Robinson continued after a moment, that controlling those emotions and channeling them into strategic action is far more effective than expressing them in ways that allow others to dismiss legitimate concerns. This resonated with Marcus, who had often observed his father's measured approach to challenges, but had never fully understood the self-discipline it required. The system responded because you knew exactly which buttons to push, Marcus observed. But what about people who don't have your knowledge or authority? What happens when they face discrimination? An excellent question, Dr. Robinson replied, genuine approval in his voice. And that's precisely why these systematic corrections are so important. The changes implemented at Skylink will benefit everyone, not just those with specialized knowledge of federal regulations. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the suite door. Dr. Robinson answered to find Jessica Miller, the passenger who had spoken up during the incident. I hope I'm not intruding, she said as Dr. Robinson invited her in. I wanted to check on Marcus and provide my contact information in case it's needed for any further proceedings. That's very thoughtful, Dr. Robinson replied. We appreciate your willingness to document what you observed. Jessica smiled at Marcus. How are you doing, young man? That was a lot to handle for someone your age. I'm okay, thank you, Marcus replied. My dad says what happened will help make things better for other passengers. Jessica nodded. Your father's response was remarkable. I've never seen such a comprehensive and immediate reaction to discrimination. Usually, these incidents get addressed with an apology email and a voucher, if they're addressed at all. Documentation is essential, Dr. Robinson explained. Without proper evidence and procedural follow-through, systematic problems persist. That's exactly why I started recording. Jessica said, I travel weekly for work, and I've witnessed incidents before, but people rarely have the knowledge or resources to make the system respond properly. As they conversed, Marcus observed the connection forming between his father and Jessica, two adults who had responded to injustice in complementary ways, one through official channels and the other through social documentation. Both approaches had contributed to the unprecedented response. After Jessica departed, promising to stay in touch regarding the ongoing investigation, Marcus returned to the balcony with his father. Dad, he said after a thoughtful silence, I think I understand better now why you always focus on documentation and proper channels. It's not just about rules, it's about creating change that lasts. Nurse Robinson smiled, genuine pride evident in his expression. Exactly, Marcus. Individual reactions might feel satisfying, but they rarely create structural improvements. Real change requires understanding how systems work and how to activate them effectively. But you also said my feelings about it were valid, Marcus noted. So it's okay to feel angry or hurt, just not to let that control how I respond. Precisely, his father seemed pleased with this insight. Feelings inform us, but strategic responses transform situations. Your mother would be so proud of how you're processing all this. The mention of his mother again, twice in one conversation, underscored for Marcus just how significant this moment was. His father rarely spoke of her, the pain of her loss still evident years later. As they sat together watching the capital city below, Marcus reflected on everything he had witnessed over the past 36 hours, from discrimination and removal to federal intervention and systematic corrections. Though the experience had been difficult, the lessons it had taught him about dignity, strategic patience, and effective advocacy would serve him throughout his life. "I'm proud of you, son," Dr. Robinson said quietly, "not just for maintaining your composure during a difficult situation, but for your thoughtfulness in understanding the broader significance of what happened. That level of perspective is rare at any age." Coming from his father, who was typically sparing with praise, these words carried special weight. Marcus felt a warm glow of accomplishment that had nothing to do with the straight A's that had prompted this trip and everything to do with how he had conducted himself when faced with unexpected adversity. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Dr. Robinson handed Marcus a small leather notebook, similar to the one he carried for his own official documentation. "I thought you might like your own," he explained, "for recording observations and documenting experiences." Marcus accepted the gift with surprise and appreciation, understanding its significance. His father wasn't just giving him a notebook, he was acknowledging Marcus's growing maturity and capacity to observe and document the world around him. "Thanks, Dad," he said simply, but the words carried the weight of everything they had experienced together. As Marcus drifted off to sleep, the leather notebook on his nightstand, he realized that while the discrimination they had faced had been painful, the response it had triggered, both the federal intervention and this deeper connection with his father, had created something meaningful from an experience that might otherwise have left only scars. Justice, he was learning, wasn't just about punishment for wrongdoing, it was about creating systems that worked better for everyone, turning individual pain into collective improvement. It was a lesson far more valuable than any first-class ticket could ever be. The corporate transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this emergency all-staff broadcast. I'm Gregory Patterson, CEO of Skylink Airways. The transmission reached every Skylink facility nationwide, maintenance hangars, crew lounges, administrative offices, and training centers, where employees gathered around screens to hear directly from their chief executive. Patterson's normally confident demeanor was subdued, his expression reflecting the gravity of the situation. Yesterday, Skylink experienced the most significant operational disruption in our company's history, a complete ground stop of our entire fleet resulting in approximately $75 million in direct losses and incalculable damage to our reputation and public trust. He paused, letting the magnitude of those figures register with the audience. This extraordinary action was triggered by an incident aboard Flight 847 from Chicago to Washington, D.C., where Captain Richard Harmon and flight attendant Karen Whitfield removed a 12-year-old African-American passenger from first class by citing a non-existent security protocol designated as TS-714. The camera pulled back slightly to reveal a conference table where several other executives sat with solemn expressions. This incident represents a catastrophic failure, not just of individual judgment, but of our entire operational culture. When a Skylink captain feels empowered to invent security protocols for discriminatory purposes, it reveals fundamental problems that demand immediate and comprehensive correction. In crew lounges across the country, pilots and flight attendants watched with growing concern, many learning the full details of the incident for the first time. Some exchanged uncomfortable glances, perhaps recognizing similar incidents they had witnessed or participated in that had not resulted in such severe consequences. Today, I want to address three critical aspects of this failure. Patterson continued. First, the individuals directly involved are being held accountable through appropriate disciplinary processes. Second, Skylink is implementing comprehensive system-wide changes to prevent similar incidents in the future. And third, we are making personal restitution to Marcus Robinson and his father, Dr. Elijah Robinson, who were subjected to discriminatory treatment and public humiliation while simply attempting to use the first-class tickets they had legitimately purchased. Marcus and Dr. Robinson were not watching this broadcast. They were continuing their weekend in Washington, D.C., visiting the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, ironically, examining exhibitions on aviation safety and regulatory development that Dr. Robinson had contributed to during his career. But across Skylink's network, thousands of employees were witnessing an unprecedented moment of corporate accountability and commitment to systematic change. Effective immediately, Patterson announced, Skylink is implementing the following changes. He began listing the comprehensive transformation plan that would reshape the airline's entire approach to training, compliance, and customer interaction. All security protocols must be verified through centralized dispatch before implementation. Any citation of protocols must include specific reference numbers that passengers can independently verify. All crew members will undergo comprehensive bias awareness training developed in partnership with leading civil rights organizations. Customer service metrics will be revised to prioritize equitable treatment above subjective measures of premium passenger experience. And an independent oversight board will be established to review all passenger complaints alleging discriminatory treatment, with quarterly reports delivered directly to our board of directors. In the Skylink Training Center in Atlanta, instructor Monica Jenkins watched the broadcast with particular interest. For years, she had attempted to incorporate more robust bias awareness content into flight crew training, only to have it repeatedly deprioritized in favor of service protocols focused on premium passenger expectations, a euphemism that sometimes enabled the very discriminatory behaviors now being addressed. This represents a fundamental reset of our organizational priorities. Patterson continued, "For too long, our industry has operated with implicit assumptions about who looks like a first-class passenger or who belongs in premium cabins. Those assumptions have no place in modern aviation, and Skylink is committing today to eradicating them from every aspect of our operation." The camera shifted to include Anthony Reynolds, who had been appointed to lead the transformation initiative. "We're implementing these changes not just because of the financial impact of the federal compliance review, but because it's fundamentally the right thing to do. Every passenger deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of age, race, or appearance." In Chicago, Karen Whitfield watched the broadcast from her living room, her Skylink uniform hanging unworn in her closet during her administrative leave. The full consequences of her actions were becoming increasingly clear as she witnessed the company-wide transformation triggered by the incident she had initiated with her suspicious questioning of Marcus Robinson. As she watched, Karen reflected on her own complicated motivations that day. Born and raised in a privileged suburb where she rarely interacted with people of color, she had spent 12 years cultivating what she considered premium service intuition, an ability to distinguish passengers who belonged in first class from those who didn't. It was a skill tacitly rewarded by Skylink, whose training emphasized maintaining premium cabin standards without explicitly defining what those standards meant in practice. The realization that her intuition was actually bias, and that this bias had nearly destroyed the company she'd dedicated her career to, was beginning to penetrate the defensive shell she'd constructed around her actions. "We failed our values, our passengers, and ourselves," Patterson acknowledged, his voice carrying genuine regret. "But failure creates opportunity for improvement, and Skylink is committed to emerging from this experience as a better, more equitable airline that truly serves all passengers with the dignity they deserve." The broadcast continued with detailed explanations of the specific policy changes, training revisions, and accountability mechanisms being implemented. It concluded with a personal commitment from Patterson. "Finally, I want to speak directly to Marcus Robinson, the young man who experienced discrimination aboard our aircraft yesterday. Marcus, on behalf of everyone at Skylink, I offer our deepest apology for how you were treated. No child, indeed, no passenger of any age, should ever experience what you did. Your dignity in the face of that treatment stands as an example to all of us, and the changes we're implementing today will help ensure that no other passenger faces similar discrimination in the future." As the broadcast ended, discussion erupted in Skylink facilities nationwide. Some employees expressed shock at the scope of the changes being implemented. Others shared similar experiences they had witnessed but never reported. A few pushed back, arguing that the response was disproportionate to the incident, but most recognized the fundamental correctness of addressing systematic failures that had long been ignored or minimized. In Washington, D.C., unaware of the corporate transformation unfolding because of their experience, Marcus stood with his father examining a display on the evolution of aviation safety regulations. "Dad, look," he said, pointing to a historical photograph. "Is that you, Dr.?" Robinson smiled slightly. "Yes, that was during the implementation of the Enhanced Safety Oversight Program in 2018. Those regulations established many of the protocols that were activated yesterday." Marcus studied the photograph with new appreciation, beginning to understand how his father's career had shaped systems that most people never noticed until they failed, or until they worked exactly as designed, as they had in response to Flight 847. Meanwhile, in a Skylink conference room in Atlanta, the newly formed Passenger Equity Committee was holding its first meeting. The committee, comprised of crew members, customer service representatives, and outside civil rights consultants, had been charged with completely redesigning training materials to eliminate bias in passenger interactions. The Robinson incident provides us with a clear case study, noted Dr. Jasmine Taylor, a diversity consultant engaged to lead the initiative. When we analyze the interaction patterns, we can identify at least 7 distinct moments where intervention could have prevented escalation. Captain Michael Rodriguez, a 20-year Skylink veteran, raised his hand. I've witnessed similar incidents throughout my career. The problem isn't just individual bias, it's the unspoken expectations about who belongs in premium cabins. We train crew to maintain premium standards without defining what that means. Exactly, Taylor confirmed. When standards are implicit rather than explicit, they're filled in by cultural assumptions and biases. That's how maintaining premium standards becomes code for questioning people who don't match our mental image of first-class passengers. Similar discussions were occurring across Skylink's network as the airline began the painful but necessary process of examining its culture, training, and operational practices with new clarity. What had begun as one captain's decision to invent a security protocol had triggered a transformation that would ultimately reshape not just Skylink, but potentially the entire industry's approach to equitable passenger treatment. The cost had been enormous: $75 million in direct operational losses, millions more in stock value decline, and incalculable damage to the airline's reputation. But the resulting transformation represented an investment in creating a more equitable aviation system for all passengers, regardless of whether they looked like they belonged in first class. In that sense, the cost, though painful for Skylink, would ultimately benefit the entire flying public, a systematic correction triggered by one moment of discrimination that might otherwise have gone unaddressed without Dr. Robinson's knowledge of how to activate proper oversight channels. For Karen Whitfield, watching the broadcast alone in her living room, the reckoning was just beginning. The realization that she had been not just wrong but demonstrably biased in her actions was forcing a painful reassessment of assumptions she'd held for years. As difficult as that process would be, it represented exactly the kind of personal transformation that would need to occur thousands of times across the organization for Skylink's cultural change to become meaningful and lasting. And Captain Harmon, watching the same broadcast from his suburban home, was beginning his own journey of accountability, one that would require confronting not just the fact that he had invented a security protocol, but the deeper question of why he had so readily accepted the premise that a black child didn't belong in first class. That journey would prove longer and more difficult than he could possibly imagine, but it was a necessary component of the systematic corrections triggered by Flight 847. System-wide impact. In the wake of the Skylink incident, the Federal Aviation Administration is implementing new compliance requirements for all U.S. carriers. The announcement from FAA Director Maria Ramirez reverberated through the aviation industry, extending the impact of Flight 847 far beyond a single airline. 2 weeks after the incident, representatives from every major U.S. carrier gathered in Washington, D.C. for an unprecedented summit on protocol implementation and bias prevention. The meeting, convened by the Department of Transportation, signaled the beginning of a broader transformation in how airlines approached both security procedures and passenger treatment. The Skylink case has revealed vulnerabilities in our regulatory framework. Director Ramirez explained to the assembled executives, when a captain can invent a security protocol without verification or oversight, it undermines the entire foundation of our safety system, effective immediately. All carriers must implement centralized protocol verification procedures to prevent similar incidents. In the audience, executives from competing airlines exchanged uneasy glances. Many recognized that while Skylink had faced the most severe consequences, the underlying issues, implicit bias, inconsistent protocol implementation, and inadequate oversight, existed throughout the industry. We're instituting mandatory compliance audits for all carriers. Ramirez continued, these reviews will examine protocol implementation procedures, crew training on bias prevention, and passenger complaint resolution mechanisms. Non-compliance will result in significant operational restrictions and potential financial penalties. The message was clear: what had happened to Skylink could happen to any carrier that failed to address these systematic vulnerabilities. The prudent response was proactive reform rather than waiting for a similar incident to trigger federal intervention. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, the House Transportation Committee had convened hearings on discrimination in commercial aviation. Dr. Robinson had been called to testify about both the specific incident involving Marcus and the broader implications for aviation safety and passenger rights. What occurred on Flight 847 represents more than an isolated case of discrimination. Robinson explained to the committee, when security protocols can be invented or misrepresented by flight crew, it creates fundamental safety vulnerabilities that extend far beyond issues of equitable treatment. Committee members listened attentively as Dr. Robinson outlined the systematic failures that had enabled the incident and the comprehensive reforms now being implemented across the industry. The Robinson Protocol, as it's now being called in regulatory circles, he continued, establishes verification requirements for any security measures cited by flight crew. This ensures that passengers can confirm the legitimacy of protocols being applied to them, preventing misuse of security justifications for discriminatory purposes. In schools across the country, Marcus's experience had sparked conversations about civil rights, aviation regulations, and the power of documentation to trigger systemic change. At Westview Middle School in Chicago, teacher Sarah Johnson had developed a special civic education module based on the incident. What makes this case so powerful as a teaching tool, she explained to her 8th grade class, is how it demonstrates the connection between individual rights and systematic accountability. By properly documenting what happened and knowing which channels to activate, Dr. Robinson triggered changes that will benefit millions of passengers who never know his name. Students engaged enthusiastically with the material, particularly impressed by how Marcus had maintained his dignity throughout the experience and how his father had focused on systematic corrections rather than personal retaliation. At Skylink's training facility in Dallas, Karen Whitfield sat in the back row of a classroom, participating in the newly implemented bias awareness program that all employees were now required to complete. Her initial resentment had gradually transformed into uncomfortable recognition as the training highlighted exactly the kind of implicit assumptions that had guided her interaction with Marcus. The danger of implicit bias, explained facilitator Dr. Michael Chen, is that it operates below the level of conscious awareness. Ms. Whitfield didn't explicitly decide to discriminate against a 12-year-old passenger. She made automatic assumptions about who belongs in first class based on deeply ingrained patterns of association. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Recognizing herself in the description, the past 2 weeks had been a profound reckoning for her, forcing her to confront aspects of her thinking and behavior that she had never previously examined. I didn't see myself as biased, she admitted during the small group discussion portion. I thought I was just doing my job, maintaining standards in the premium cabin. But when I reflect on who I've questioned versus who I've welcomed without scrutiny, the pattern is undeniable. This painful but honest self-assessment represented exactly the kind of personal growth that organizational transformation required, multiplied across thousands of employees throughout the aviation industry, across the aviation landscape. Similar transformations were occurring as carriers rushed to implement reforms before federal auditors arrived at their facilities. What had begun as one airline's crisis had evolved into an industry-wide reassessment of practices, procedures, and underlying assumptions that had long gone unchallenged. In Washington, D.C., Dr. Mark Robinson received an unexpected invitation to the White House, where the president's advisor on transportation policy requested his input on proposed legislation to strengthen passenger rights and prevent discriminatory treatment in commercial aviation. Your experience has created a unique opportunity for meaningful reform, the advisor explained. We'd like to incorporate your expertise into legislation that would establish industry-wide standards for protocol implementation and passenger treatment. Dr. Robinson agreed to provide technical consultation, maintaining his characteristic focus on systematic improvements rather than political considerations. The resulting bill, eventually titled the Commercial Aviation Accountability Act, would establish the most significant passenger rights protections since the airline deregulation era. At Marcus's school, News of his experience had transformed him from an ordinary sixth grader to something of a minor celebrity. Students and teachers alike were impressed not just by what had happened to him, but by how he had responded, with dignity, composure, and thoughtfulness beyond his years. "Did you know your dad was going to ground the whole airline?" his friend Tyler asked during lunch period. Marcus shook his head. He wasn't trying to punish the airline. He was making sure the system worked properly so the same thing doesn't happen to someone else. This perspective, focusing on improvement rather than retribution, reflected the values Dr. Robinson had instilled in his son. It was an approach that emphasized long-term solutions over short-term satisfaction, systematic corrections over individual consequences. "But weren't you mad?" another friend asked. "I would have been so mad I'd want them all fired." Marcus considered this thoughtfully. "I was upset when it happened. It felt really unfair. But my dad always says that anger doesn't fix problems. Proper documentation does." His classmates exchanged glances, not fully comprehending this unusual approach to injustice. But several teachers who overheard the conversation recognized the profound wisdom in this perspective, one that privileged systematic improvement over emotional reaction. As the weeks passed, the immediate media attention surrounding Flight 847 gradually subsided, but the systematic changes it had triggered continued to transform the aviation landscape. New training programs, verification procedures, and oversight mechanisms were being implemented across the industry, creating a more equitable environment for all passengers regardless of age, race, or appearance. For Marcus Robinson, what had begun as a humiliating experience had ultimately provided a powerful lesson in how systems could be activated to create meaningful change. Though he couldn't have articulated it at 12 years old, he had witnessed the delicate machinery of regulatory oversight, properly triggered, creating ripples of transformation that extended far beyond his personal experience. And in that sense, the incident aboard Flight 847, painful as it had been in the moment, had served a purpose far more significant than anyone could have anticipated when Karen Whitfield first questioned whether a young black boy really belonged in first class. The personal victory. "Mr. Robinson and Marcus, on behalf of Skylink Airways, I want to formally apologize for the discriminatory treatment you experienced aboard Flight 847. The words came from Gregory Patterson himself, sitting across from them in a private meeting room at Skylink's headquarters 1 month after the incident. The written apology he slid across the table was printed on heavy cardstock bearing the company's letterhead, the language carefully crafted yet unmistakably sincere. It acknowledged specifically that Marcus had been removed from the aircraft based on discriminatory assumptions and a falsified security protocol, taking full responsibility without qualification or excuse. Marcus accepted the document with quiet dignity, noting that it was addressed to him personally rather than to his father, a small but significant recognition of his individual experience rather than treating him as merely an extension of his parent. "Thank you, Mr. Patterson," Marcus replied, his voice steady and clear. "I appreciate Skylink taking responsibility for what happened." Robinson observed his son with subtle pride, noting his composure and maturity in a situation that would challenge many adults. Throughout the entire experience, Marcus had demonstrated a remarkable capacity for processing difficult emotions while maintaining his dignity, a skill that would serve him well throughout life. "Beyond this formal apology," Patterson continued, "I want to update you on the changes Skylink has implemented as a result of this incident. All security protocols now require centralized verification before implementation. Our entire crew training program has been redesigned with extensive focus on bias prevention and equitable passenger treatment, and we've established an independent oversight board to review all complaints alleging discriminatory treatment." Robinson nodded approvingly. "These are substantive changes that address the systematic vulnerabilities revealed by our experience. I'm particularly pleased to see the centralized verification requirement for security protocols, which will prevent similar misuse in the future." Patterson's expression reflected genuine commitment rather than mere corporate damage control. This incident has been profoundly transformative for Skylink. Painful as it was, particularly for Marcus, it revealed failures in our systems that might otherwise have continued indefinitely. After concluding their meeting with Patterson, Richard Robinson and Marcus were escorted to Skylink's newly renovated training center, where they had been invited to observe the enhanced crew training program now being implemented. This is the bias awareness module that all Skylink employees are now required to complete, explained Training Director Jennifer Williams as they entered an observation room overlooking a classroom where flight attendants were engaged in scenario-based learning exercises. Through one-way glass, they watched as instructors guided crew members through various challenging scenarios, including one directly inspired by Marcus's experience, a young minority passenger in first class being questioned about their legitimacy. "We're teaching specific intervention techniques," Williams explained. "Any crew member who observes potentially discriminatory treatment is now empowered, in fact required, to intervene immediately rather than deferring to the senior crew member involved." Marcus observed with fascination as the training unfolded, realizing that his experience was now literally being used to teach others how to prevent similar incidents. What had been a painful personal experience had been transformed into an educational tool that would benefit countless future passengers. Later that afternoon, they boarded a Skylink flight for their return to Chicago, their first time flying the airline since the incident. Marcus noticed subtle but significant differences in how crew members interacted with all passengers, particularly those who might previously have been subjected to additional scrutiny in premium cabins. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Robinson," the lead flight attendant greeted Marcus with genuine warmth, showing no hint of the suspicion Karen Whitfield had displayed. "We're honored to have you flying with us today." As they settled into their seats, first class, as originally booked for that fateful trip a month earlier, Dr. Robinson turned to his son. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus considered the question thoughtfully. "I'm thinking about how different everything is now. Not just how they're treating us, but how they're treating everyone." Robinson nodded. "That's the difference between individual accommodation and systematic change. If they had simply offered us special treatment after the incident, it might have addressed our personal situation but wouldn't have helped anyone else. Like how they offered us the corporate jet that day, but you said no." Marcus recalled. "Exactly," his father confirmed. "By insisting on proper procedures and systematic corrections rather than personal concessions, we helped create changes that benefit all passengers, not just those with connections or special status." As the flight progressed, Captain Michael Rodriguez made an announcement that further demonstrated how deeply the culture had shifted. "Ladies and gentlemen, as your captain, I want to assure you that all security and safety protocols aboard this aircraft are standardized and verifiable. If any crew member cites a specific protocol during this flight, you are entitled to request verification through our central dispatch. This is part of Skylink's commitment to transparent and equitable treatment for all passengers." Marcus exchanged a meaningful glance with his father, recognizing the direct connection between their experience and this new policy, one that distributed power more evenly between crew and passengers by ensuring that security measures couldn't be invented or misrepresented. After landing in Chicago, they were surprised to find Karen Whitfield waiting in the terminal. She had requested this meeting through proper channels, and Dr. Robinson, after consulting with Marcus, had agreed to a brief conversation. "Marcus," she began, her previous arrogance completely absent, "I want to apologize personally for how I treated you that day. My behavior was inexcusable, and I'm deeply sorry for the hurt and humiliation I caused." Marcus studied her carefully, noting the genuine remorse in her expression. "Thank you for saying that, Ms. Whitfield. The past month has been—" She paused, searching for words. "It's been a profound learning experience. The training programs I've completed have forced me to confront biases I didn't even realize I carried. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that your experience has changed how I think about my role and responsibilities." Dr. Robinson observed this exchange with quiet approval, noting that his son was neither coldly dismissive nor naively accepting. He was processing Karen's apology with thoughtful maturity. "Ms. Whitfield," Marcus finally responded, "my dad always says that mistakes are valuable if they lead to learning and improvement. I hope that's what happens here." Karen nodded, visibly moved by this measured response from a child she had treated with such unwarranted suspicion. "That's wise advice. Thank you for being willing to speak with me today." As they left the airport, Marcus reflected on everything that had unfolded since that morning a month ago when they had first boarded Flight 847. "Dad, do you think things will really stay changed? Or will they just go back to how they were before once people forget about what happened?" Robinson considered this thoughtfully. Sustainable change requires both structural reforms and cultural shifts. Skylink has implemented the structural aspects, new policies, training, and oversight mechanisms. The cultural dimension will take longer and require ongoing commitment, but the foundation has been established for meaningful, lasting improvement. Marcus nodded, understanding that real transformation was rarely simple or immediate. It unfolded gradually through interconnected changes in systems, procedures, and ultimately, human behavior. That evening, as they arrived home, Marcus noticed a package waiting on their doorstep. Inside was a letter from Jessica Miller, the passenger who had spoken up during the incident, along with a framed photograph of the Washington Monument taken from almost exactly the perspective they had seen from their hotel balcony. To Marcus, the note read, whose dignity inspired change that will benefit countless passengers who will never know his name. And to Dr. Robinson, who showed us all that systems can work when properly activated by those who understand them. Thank you for turning a moment of injustice into a catalyst for lasting improvement. As Marcus showed the gift to his father, he realized that while the discrimination they had faced had been painful, the response it had triggered, both the systematic changes across the aviation industry and the personal connections forged through the experience, represented a different kind of victory than he had initially imagined. It wasn't about punishment or vindication, but about transformation and improvement, turning an individual injustice into a catalyst for collective progress. And in that sense, boarding that flight to Washington, D.C. a month ago had indeed been the educational experience his father had intended, though in ways neither of them could possibly have anticipated. Parrot Week 5, the aftermath. 1 month later, the key distinction between compliance and commitment is sustainability. Karen Whitfield explained to the group of new Skylink flight attendants gathered for their final training session. Compliance means following rules because you have to. Commitment means embracing the underlying principles because you understand their value. 3 months after the incident on Flight 847, Karen stood in Skylink's training center, not as a disciplinary example, but as part of the solution, sharing her personal journey from bias to awareness with newly hired crew members who would shape the airline's future culture. I was initially resistant, she acknowledged candidly. I viewed the mandatory bias training as punishment rather than opportunity. I resented being labeled as discriminatory when I believed I was simply doing my job. The new trainees listened attentively, many having applied to Skylink specifically because of the airline's newfound reputation for progressive training and equitable passenger treatment, an unexpected positive outcome of the very public transformation triggered by the Robinson incident. Working with Dr. Jasmine Taylor changed everything, Karen continued, gesturing to the diversity consultant seated nearby. She helped me understand that bias isn't about being a bad person. It's about recognizing and correcting automatic assumptions we've absorbed from our environment. Dr. Taylor nodded encouragingly. Initially engaged as an external consultant, she had recently accepted a permanent position as Skylink's first chief equity officer, overseeing the ongoing implementation of the comprehensive reforms initiated after Flight 847. Ms. Whitfield's journey represents exactly the kind of transformation we're working to facilitate throughout the organization. Dr. Taylor explained to the trainees, not punishment for past mistakes, but growth and development toward more equitable practices. Karen's transformation hadn't been instant or easy. In the days immediately following the incident, she had cycled through denial. I was just following procedures. Deflection. The captain made the final decision. And defensiveness. Anyone would have questioned someone who didn't look like they belonged. The turning point came during her third bias training session, when Dr. Taylor showed video footage from similar incidents across multiple airlines, a pattern so consistent it couldn't be dismissed as coincidence. I saw myself reflected in those videos. Karen explained to the trainees, the same subtle expressions of skepticism when checking certain passengers' tickets, the same repeated verification for some travelers but not others, the same underlying assumption that certain people didn't belong in premium cabins. This painful self-recognition had led to genuine introspection about the biases that had shaped her interactions with passengers throughout her career. Karen had begun keeping a journal documenting her own thought processes when meeting passengers, noting when she made automatic assumptions based on appearance rather than factual information. What I discovered was disturbing, she admitted. I had developed mental shortcuts about who looked like a first-class passenger, These weren't conscious decisions. They were automatic, instinctive assessments I'd never questioned until I was forced to confront them directly. Across the country in Washington, D.C., Captain Richard Harmon was engaged in a parallel process of accountability and growth. Unlike Karen, who had eventually acknowledged her biased behavior and embraced the opportunity for change, Harmon had initially remained defensive, insisting that his actions had been motivated solely by security concerns rather than discriminatory assumptions. Captain Harmon, observed Dr. Michael Reynolds, the aviation psychologist assigned to his case, you cited a non-existent security protocol to remove a child from first class. We need to examine what underlying factors contributed to that decision. Seated in Dr. Reynolds' office for his weekly session, a condition of his continued employment with Skylink, Harmon struggled visibly with this direct confrontation of his actions. I believed I was following established procedures, he insisted, though with less conviction than in previous sessions. Richard, Dr. Reynolds responded gently, using the captain's first name to emphasize the human dimension of their discussion. Security protocols exist to protect passengers, not to remove those who don't match our expectations of who belongs in certain spaces. By inventing Protocol TS 714, you weaponize security language to justify a discriminatory action. This framing security as protection rather than exclusion finally penetrated Harmon's defensive shell. I never thought of it that way, he admitted quietly. I've always seen myself as the protector, the authority figure responsible for maintaining order. And that's a significant part of your role as captain, Reynolds agreed, but authority without accountability becomes something else entirely. When you invented a security protocol, you abused that authority in a way that harmed a child who had done nothing wrong. For the first time since the incident, genuine remorse registered on Harmon's face. I keep thinking about how that boy looked when we removed him from the plane. He was so composed, more dignified than I was, if I'm honest. This moment of authentic reflection marked a turning point in Harmon's journey, from defensive resistance to the beginning of genuine accountability. While his path to understanding would be longer and more complicated than Karen's, it represented another dimension of the systematic transformation triggered by Flight 847. Meanwhile, at Westview Middle School in Chicago, Marcus Robinson had been invited to speak to the 8th grade social studies classes about his experience, not as a victim seeking sympathy, but as a young person with unique insight into how systems of accountability functioned when properly activated. The most important thing my father taught me, Marcus explained to students only slightly older than himself, is that documentation is power. When you face unfair treatment, emotional reactions might feel good in the moment, but strategic documentation creates lasting change. The students listened with rapt attention as Marcus described both the humiliation of being removed from the aircraft and the systematic response that had transformed that painful moment into a catalyst for industry-wide reform. My dad could have just told them who he was right away, Marcus noted. That probably would have stopped them from removing us, but then nothing would have changed for other passengers who don't have his position or authority. Social studies teacher Robert Jenkins nodded approvingly. That's an important distinction. Marcus, can you explain the difference between personal accommodation and systematic change for the class? Marcus thought for a moment before responding. Personal accommodation means fixing the problem just for you. Systematic change means fixing the underlying issues so they don't happen to anyone else. This simple but profound explanation resonated with the students, many of whom had experienced various forms of unfair treatment but lacked the framework to distinguish between individual solutions and collective improvements. At Skylink's corporate headquarters, the transformation initiated by Flight 847 continued to unfold across multiple dimensions. The Passenger Equity Committee, initially formed as a crisis response, had evolved into a permanent department with significant influence over operational policies, training programs, and customer service standards. The Robinson Protocol has been fully implemented across all Skylink operations, reported Jennifer Williams, now serving as the airline's Director of Inclusive Service Standards. All security measures must be centrally verified before implementation, with documentation available to passengers upon request. Gregory Patterson nodded approvingly. The past 3 months had been the most challenging of his professional career, but the airline emerging from this crisis was fundamentally stronger, more equitable, and better positioned for long-term success than the one that had existed before Flight 847. What's been most surprising, Patterson observed to his executive team, is the positive impact these changes have had on overall customer satisfaction metrics. By treating all passengers with consistent dignity and respect, we've actually improved our service standards across the board. This unexpected outcome, improved business performance resulting from equity-focused reforms, had begun attracting attention throughout the industry. What had initially been viewed as a costly compliance burden was increasingly recognized as a competitive advantage, with passengers actively choosing Skylink because of its new reputation for equitable treatment. In Dr. Robinson's office at the Department of Transportation, a framed letter hung prominently on the wall, the formal apology to Marcus, preserved as a reminder of how personal experience could inform professional purpose. Though Dr. Robinson had always been committed to aviation safety, his son's experience had deepened his understanding of how seemingly technical violations could have profound human consequences. The Robinson incident has become a case study in regulatory effectiveness, noted Director Maria Ramirez during a departmental review. By properly documenting the violation and activating appropriate oversight mechanisms, Dr. Robinson demonstrated exactly how our systems should function when properly implemented. This professional validation was meaningful, but for Dr. Robinson, the most significant outcome remained the growth he had witnessed in his son. Throughout the experience, from the initial discrimination to the ongoing resolution, Marcus had demonstrated remarkable resilience, thoughtfulness, and dignity. These qualities, rather than any regulatory or corporate changes, represented the true victory amid the challenges they had faced. As Karen Whitfield concluded her presentation to the new flight attendants, she offered a final reflection that captured the essence of the transformation triggered by Flight 847. The measure of an organization isn't whether mistakes occur. They inevitably will. The measure is how we respond to those mistakes, whether we learn from them, and most importantly, whether we implement changes that prevent their recurrence. What happened aboard Flight 847 revealed serious failures in our systems and our culture. But the response to that incident has created an airline that's fundamentally more equitable, more accountable, and ultimately better for everyone involved, crew members and passengers alike. This perspective, focusing on improvement rather than blame, on systems rather than individuals, reflected exactly the approach Dr. Robinson had modeled throughout the incident and its aftermath. It represented the beginning of a cultural shift that would ultimately extend far beyond a single airline or incident, influencing how organizations across multiple industries approached issues of equity, accountability, and systematic improvement. For Marcus Robinson, watching these developments unfold around him provided a powerful lesson in how individual dignity combined with strategic advocacy could create ripples of positive change extending far beyond personal experience. A lesson he would carry with him long after the details of Flight 847 had faded from public memory. 3 months later, the committee will now hear testimony from Dr. Elijah Robinson, Director of Aviation Safety Enforcement at the Department of Transportation, and his son, Marcus Robinson, regarding discriminatory practices in commercial aviation. Congresswoman Elaine Martinez's voice carried through the hearing room as the Robinson family was called to testify before the House Transportation Committee. The marble-columned chamber, with its polished wood panels and imposing architecture, presented an intimidating environment for most witnesses. But Marcus, now 13 after celebrating his birthday the previous week, approached the testimony table with remarkable composure, the same quiet dignity he had maintained throughout the Flight 847 incident and its aftermath. "Thank you, Chairwoman Martinez." Dr. Barra Robinson began once they were seated before the microphones. The incident aboard Skylink Flight 847 represents more than an isolated case of discrimination. It reveals systematic vulnerabilities in how security protocols are implemented and verified across commercial aviation. As his father delivered his opening statement, Marcus observed the committee members' reactions, some leaning forward with genuine interest, others maintaining carefully neutral expressions, a few checking phones despite the significance of the testimony. This varied engagement reflected the political realities that often complicated even the most straightforward matters of public safety and civil rights. "Before I continue with technical aspects," Dr. Robinson said, I believe it would be valuable for the committee to hear directly from Marcus about his experience that day. All attention shifted to the 13-year-old as he leaned toward the microphone. Though he had prepared extensively with his father, speaking before Congress remained an extraordinary challenge for someone his age. "Good morning," Marcus began, his voice steady despite the pressure. "My name is Marcus Robinson. 3 months ago, I was removed from Skylink Flight 847 after being repeatedly questioned about whether I belonged in first class. The flight attendant checked my ticket multiple times, and when my father requested supervisor intervention, the captain invented a security protocol to justify removing us from the aircraft. The simple, direct description of events, delivered without emotional embellishment or dramatic flourish, carried particular power coming from a child. Several committee members who had appeared distracted now focused intently on Marcus's testimony. What I remember most," Marcus continued, "is how they looked at me, like I didn't belong there even though I had the right ticket. My father had taught me about these situations, but experiencing it firsthand was different. It felt small, like I was being reduced to just how I looked rather than who I was." A hush had fallen over the committee room. The typical background murmurs of aides whispering and paper shuffling, momentarily silenced by the authentic voice of a child describing discrimination through his own eyes. "But what happened afterward was important too," Marcus added. "My father showed me that systems can work when properly activated. Instead of just getting angry, he documented everything and followed the right procedures. That triggered changes that will help other passengers who might face similar treatment but don't have his position or authority." When Marcus finished speaking, the silence continued for a moment before Congresswoman Martinez responded. "Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Your composure and clarity are remarkable, especially given the circumstances you're describing." Several committee members nodded in agreement, visibly moved by Marcus's testimony. What followed was a standing ovation, an extremely rare occurrence in congressional hearings, as representatives from both parties rose to acknowledge the young man's extraordinary poise and perspective. Dr. Robinson then continued with the technical portion of his testimony, outlining specific regulatory reforms needed to prevent similar incidents across the aviation industry. His recommendations, informed by both professional expertise and personal experience, included mandatory verification systems for all security protocols cited by flight crew, with documentation accessible to passengers, comprehensive bias awareness training integrated into core safety certification requirements rather than treated as separate sensitivity modules, independent oversight mechanisms for passenger complaints alleging discriminatory treatment, with quarterly public reporting requirements, and standardized data collection on passenger removal incidents to identify patterns that might otherwise remain invisible in isolated reports. These technical recommendations, while seemingly dry compared to Marcus's personal testimony, represented the systematic reforms that would ultimately create lasting change across the industry, transforming one family's painful experience into protections that would benefit millions of travelers. After the hearing concluded to unusual bipartisan support, Marcus and his father were approached by numerous representatives eager to express both outrage at what had occurred and appreciation for their constructive approach to addressing it. "What impressed me most," commented Congressman James Wilson, "wasn't just what happened to you, which was obviously unacceptable, but how you've responded to it. Instead of simply seeking punishment or compensation, you've focused on creating systematic improvements that will benefit everyone." This focus on collective improvement rather than individual redress had characterized the Robinsons' approach throughout the aftermath of Flight 847. While they could have pursued substantial financial compensation through litigation, Dr. Robinson had instead directed Skylink's remediation efforts toward the systematic reforms and industry-wide improvements. The congressional testimony represented a significant escalation in the impact of those efforts. Within weeks, the Commercial Aviation Accountability Act was introduced with unusual bipartisan support. The legislation, directly inspired by the Robinson incident, would establish the most comprehensive passenger rights protections since airline deregulation, with specific provisions addressing discriminatory treatment and security protocol implementation. Meanwhile, at Skylink's headquarters, the transformation initiated by Flight 847 continued to evolve from crisis response to fundamental organizational reset. Gregory Patterson, who had initially viewed the federal compliance review as a punitive overreaction, now embrace the reforms as essential to the airline's future success. Our passenger satisfaction metrics have increased 23% since implementing the Robinson Protocol. He reported to the board of directors. What began as a compliance burden has become a competitive advantage. Passengers are actively choosing Skylink because of our new reputation for equitable treatment and transparent security practices. This unexpected business benefit, improved performance resulting from equity-focused reforms, was beginning to influence other carriers as well. Airlines that had initially viewed Skylink's situation with a mixture of sympathy and relief, better them than us, were now racing to implement similar changes before federal regulations mandated them. The transformation extended beyond policy to personnel as well. Karen Whitfield, who had completed her bias awareness training and demonstrated genuine commitment to change, now served as a training specialist, helping other crew members recognize and address their own implicit biases. The most important thing I've learned, she explained during a training session for international flight crews, is that bias isn't about being a bad person. It's about recognizing and correcting automatic assumptions we've absorbed from our environment. My treatment of Marcus Robinson revealed biases I wasn't fully conscious of, but acknowledging them became the first step toward meaningful change. Captain Richard Harmon's journey had been more complicated. After initially resisting accountability, he had eventually accepted responsibility for his actions and undertaken the required remediation process. Though he would never again serve as a Skylink captain, he now contributed to training programs by sharing his experience as a cautionary example of how authority without accountability could lead to serious violations. I believed I was following established procedures, he acknowledged during a pilot training session. But in reality, I was using the language of security to justify a discriminatory decision. That abuse of authority caused harm to a child who had done nothing wrong, triggered a system-wide grounding of our entire fleet, and ultimately cost the airline over $75 million in direct operational losses. This honest acknowledgement, linking individual actions to both human and financial consequences, proved particularly effective in helping other pilots understand the true cost of discriminatory behavior disguised as security concerns. For Marcus Robinson, the congressional testimony represented another step in an unexpected journey from ordinary middle school student to reluctant symbol of both discriminatory treatment and systematic response. Though he hadn't sought this role, he had embraced the opportunity to transform his difficult experience into meaningful change for others. Back at school the following week, Marcus found himself approached by younger students who had seen clips of his congressional testimony on news programs or social media. "Were you scared?" asked a seventh grader during lunch period. Speaking in front of all those important people, Marcus considered the question thoughtfully. "A little, he admitted. But I kept thinking about what my dad always says, that speaking up properly can help change things for people who can't speak for themselves. That made it feel more important than being scared." This perspective, focusing on collective impact rather than individual comfort, reflected the values Dr. Robinson had instilled in his son throughout his upbringing. It represented a maturity and social awareness unusual for a 13-year-old, qualities that had been further developed through the extraordinary experience of the past 3 months. As spring turned to summer, the ripple effects of Flight 847 continued to expand across the aviation landscape. The Robinson Protocol was being implemented by carriers worldwide, not just in response to regulatory pressure, but as a recognized best practice for both safety compliance and passenger experience. For the Robinson family, what had begun as a humiliating incident had ultimately become a catalyst for meaningful change, not through angry confrontation or litigation, but through strategic documentation, proper channels, and the quiet dignity that had characterized their response from the very beginning. In that sense, the standing ovation Marcus received from Congress represented more than personal recognition. It acknowledged the power of approaching injustice with both emotional resilience and strategic purpose, transforming individual pain into collective progress through the systematic activation of accountability mechanisms that might otherwise have remained dormant. As Dr. Robinson had told his son throughout the experience, systems only improve when their failures are properly documented and addressed. The implementation of the Robinson Protocol across the aviation industry ensured that the documentation of one such failure would prevent countless others, creating a legacy far more meaningful than the incident that had triggered it. 6 months later, Implementation of the Robinson Protocol has resulted in a 64% reduction in discriminatory incident reports across participating carriers. The statistics presented at the International Aviation Safety Summit in Geneva, Switzerland, confirmed what industry insiders had already observed. The systematic changes triggered by Flight 847 were creating measurable improvements in equitable passenger treatment worldwide. Dr. Robinson, invited to deliver the keynote address at this prestigious gathering of aviation safety professionals from 87 countries, approached the podium with his characteristic calm authority. Though he had spoken at similar events throughout his career, this particular presentation carried special significance given its connection to his son's personal experience. Safety and equity are not separate considerations in modern aviation, he began, addressing the assembled executives, regulators, and safety specialists. When security protocols can be invented or misapplied for discriminatory purposes, it creates fundamental vulnerabilities that undermine the entire foundation of our safety systems. The conference hall was filled to capacity, with representatives from airlines, regulatory agencies, and aircraft manufacturers all eager to understand the implications of what had become known throughout the industry as the Robinson incident, now a case study in how individual discrimination could reveal systematic weaknesses with industry-wide ramifications. The protocol verification system now being implemented globally ensures that any security measure cited by flight crew must be centrally documented and independently verifiable. Robinson explained, this prevents the misuse of security language to justify discriminatory actions while simultaneously strengthening legitimate protocol implementation. As he continued outlining the technical aspects of the reforms now being adopted internationally, Dr. Robinson maintained his focus on systems rather than individuals, exactly the approach he had demonstrated throughout the Flight 847 aftermath. There was no mention of personal vindication or punishment for those involved, only the methodical explanation of how documented failures could lead to meaningful improvements. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., President Gabriela Rodriguez was signing the Commercial Aviation Accountability Act into law, legislation directly inspired by Marcus's experience that established the most comprehensive passenger rights protections in U.S. aviation history. This bipartisan legislation demonstrates that ensuring equitable treatment and transparent security practices transcends political divisions, the president noted during the signing ceremony. When a 13-year-old child can be removed from an aircraft based on a fabricated security protocol, it reveals vulnerabilities that affect every passenger regardless of political affiliation. The law, which had passed with unusual cross-party support, codified many of the reforms initially implemented by Skylink into federal requirements applicable to all commercial carriers operating in U.S. airspace. Its provisions included mandatory protocol verification systems, standardized data collection on passenger removals, and independent oversight mechanisms for discrimination complaints. At Skylink's headquarters, the transformation that had begun as crisis response had evolved into a fundamental organizational reset, with equity and transparency now central to the airline's brand identity and operational philosophy. 6 months ago, Skylink experienced the most significant crisis in our company's history, Gregory Patterson acknowledged during a town hall meeting with employees. Today, we're being recognized as industry leaders in equitable service standards and transparent security practices. That transformation represents extraordinary commitment from everyone in this organization. The airline's financial recovery had been equally remarkable. After the initial $75 million operational loss and subsequent stock decline, Skylink had rebounded strongly as passengers responded positively to its reformed practices and renewed commitment to equitable treatment. What began as a compliance requirement has become a competitive advantage, noted Anthony Reynolds, now serving as Skylink's Chief Customer Experience Officer. Our passenger satisfaction metrics have increased significantly across all demographic groups, with particularly notable improvements among minority travelers who previously reported lower satisfaction levels. This business case for equity, improved performance resulting from reform practices, was influencing carriers worldwide as executives recognized that treating all passengers with consistent dignity and respect wasn't just ethically correct, but financially advantageous. For Karen Whitfield, the journey from discriminatory flight attendant to equity advocate continued to evolve in unexpected ways. After completing her bias awareness training and demonstrating genuine commitment to change, she had been invited to participate in developing new training materials for international carriers implementing the Robinson Protocol. My experience represents both failure and opportunity, she explained to flight attendants from 11 different airlines during a training session in Singapore. My treatment of Marcus Robinson revealed biases I wasn't fully conscious of, but acknowledging them became the first step toward meaningful change, both personally and systematically. This authentic testimony from someone who had actually participated in a high-profile discriminatory incident carried particular impact, helping crew members understand that bias awareness wasn't about assigning blame, but about creating opportunity for growth and improvement. At Chicago's Westview Middle School, Marcus Robinson, now in 8th grade, continued navigating the complex territory between ordinary adolescence and his unexpected role as a symbol of both discriminatory treatment and systematic response. Though media interest had gradually subsided, the experience remained a significant part of his identity in developing worldview. The most important thing I learned, he explained to his social studies class during a unit on civic engagement, was that changing systems works better than just changing individual behavior. If we had only focused on the specific people who discriminated against me, nothing would have improved for other passengers. By focusing on the systems that allowed it to happen, we created changes that benefit everyone. This sophisticated understanding of institutional change versus individual accountability reflected the extraordinary maturity Marcus had developed through his experience, a perspective that impressed teachers and classmates alike. Marcus has always been a thoughtful student, noted Principal Sandra Jackson, but the way he's processed this experience shows remarkable resilience and insight. Instead of becoming bitter or seeking attention, he's focused on what can be learned and how others can benefit from his experience. This focus on collective benefit rather than personal vindication continued to characterize the Robinson family's approach to the aftermath of Flight 847. Though they had been offered substantial financial compensation through various channels, Dr. Robinson had directed these resources toward establishing a scholarship fund for students interested in aviation safety and civil rights, transforming personal restitution into educational opportunity. The Robinson method, strategic documentation, proper channels, and systematic activation of accountability mechanisms had become something of a template for addressing discriminatory incidents across multiple industries. Civil rights organizations now specifically cited the Flight 847 response as a case study in effective advocacy, emphasizing the power of methodical documentation over emotional confrontation. In Geneva, as Dr. Robinson concluded his keynote address to the International Aviation Safety Summit, he shared a personal reflection that captured the essence of what the past 6 months had revealed. My son's experience aboard Flight 847 was painful for him as an individual, but the systematic response it triggered has created protections that will benefit millions of passengers who will never know his name or story. That transformation from individual injury to collective improvement represents the highest purpose of regulatory systems, not punishment for its own sake, but the creation of structures that prevent similar harm to others. This perspective, focusing on prevention rather than retribution, on improvement rather than blame, reflected exactly the values Dr. Robinson had demonstrated throughout his career and had worked to instill in his son. It represented a mature understanding that true justice wasn't about satisfying the desire for punishment, but about creating conditions where injustice became increasingly rare. As the audience rose in standing ovation, Dr. Robinson thought about Marcus, currently in school thousands of miles away, navigating the ordinary challenges of adolescence while carrying the extraordinary lessons of their shared experience. Though the path had been unexpected and often difficult, the transformation it had triggered, both personal and systematic, represented a legacy far more meaningful than either of them could have anticipated when boarding that fateful flight 6 months earlier. In that sense, the Robinson Protocol wasn't just about aviation regulations or security procedures. It was about the power of dignity maintained in the face of discrimination, combined with the strategic activation of accountability systems to create ripples of positive change extending far beyond individual experience. Standing at the boarding gate for Skylink Flight 1093 from Chicago to Washington, D.C., Yesha Marcus Robinson felt a flutter of anxiety in his stomach, not from fear of discrimination, but from the simple significance of the moment. Exactly 1 year had passed since that fateful day when he and his father had been removed from Flight 847, triggering a transformation that had reshaped not just their lives, but the entire aviation industry. "You okay, Marcus?" Dr. Robinson asked quietly, noticing his son's thoughtful expression. "Yeah," Marcus nodded, "just thinking about everything that's changed since last year." Robinson squeezed his son's shoulder gently. "A lot has changed, hasn't it?" As they approached the gate agent, Marcus observed subtle but significant differences in the boarding process. Differences most passengers would never notice, but that represented the systematic improvements implemented in response to their experience. "Good morning, Mr. Robinson." The agent greeted Marcus with genuine warmth, scanning his boarding pass without the repeated verification Karen Whitfield had subjected him to a year earlier. "Thank you for flying with Skylink today. We appreciate your business." The simple transaction, ordinary, professional, without a hint of suspicion or scrutiny, represented exactly the equal treatment that had been denied to him that previous January morning. Though other passengers moved through the same process without a second thought, for Marcus, this routine interaction carried profound significance. As they settled into their first-class seats, the same premium cabin where the incident had begun, Marcus noticed a small placard in the seatback pocket that hadn't been there the previous year. It contained information about passenger rights, including a specific section titled Security Protocol Verification. All security measures cited by flight crew must reference official protocol designations that passengers may verify through our central dispatch if desired. For verification, please contact a crew member or call 1-800-SKY-SAFE during your flight. This transparent accountability mechanism, now standard across all major carriers following implementation of the Commercial Aviation Accountability Act, represented perhaps the most tangible outcome of their experience. What had begun with Captain Harmon's invention of the non-existent Protocol TS-714 had ultimately created a system where such fabrication was no longer possible. As the flight attendants moved through their pre-departure routines, Marcus observed other subtle changes in how they interacted with all passengers. The consistent courtesy, the absence of the subtle differential treatment he had sometimes noticed in the past, the small but significant shift in service culture that reflected deeper institutional transformation. "Welcome aboard Skylink Flight 193 to Washington, D.C., announced Captain Michael Rodriguez over the intercom. "As your captain today, I want to assure all passengers that your safety and equitable treatment are our highest priorities. All security protocols aboard this aircraft are standardized and verifiable through our central dispatch system." This standardized announcement, now required by federal regulations across all commercial flights, represented another direct outcome of the Flight 847 incident. Though few passengers likely understood its significance or origin, for Marcus and his father, it carried special meaning as confirmation that their painful experience had triggered lasting improvements for all travelers. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Marcus gazed out the window at O'Hare's bustling tarmac, the same view he had seen a year earlier before being escorted off the plane under Officer Wilson's watchful eye. The contrast between that humiliating exit and today's routine departure highlighted just how much had changed in the intervening months. "What are you thinking about, Doctor?" Robinson asked, noticing his son's reflective expression. Marcus turned from the window. "I'm thinking about how one bad experience led to so many good changes. It's kind of amazing when you think about it." Robinson nodded. "That's how progress often happens, not through grand designs or perfect systems, but through learning from failures and implementing corrections that prevent their recurrence." This perspective, finding meaning in difficulty through systematic improvement, had characterized their approach throughout the aftermath of Flight 847. Rather than dwelling on personal injury or seeking punishment for its own sake, they had focused on creating structures that would prevent similar experiences for others. As the aircraft gained altitude above Chicago, Marcus reflected on everything that had unfolded since that January morning: congressional testimony, international aviation reforms, and the profound personal growth he had experienced through it all. Though none of it had been part of their original plan for that first-class trip to Washington, the journey it had triggered had ultimately proven far more significant than their intended destination. Sometimes justice doesn't just mean punishing wrong. Robinson had told him during one of their many conversations about the experience. Sometimes it means creating lasting right. That creation, the Robinson Protocol, now implemented across global aviation, the Commercial Aviation Accountability Act now protecting all passengers, and the subtle but significant cultural shifts occurring throughout the industry, represented a legacy far more meaningful than any personal vindication could have been. As Skylink Flight 1093 leveled at cruising altitude, Marcus Robinson, no longer the nervous 12-year-old who had been questioned about belonging in first class, but a confident 14-year-old who had helped change an industry, opened the new leather notebook his father had given him and began to write. Not about discrimination or humiliation, but about systems and accountability, about dignity maintained in difficult circumstances, and about the power of strategic patience to create changes that anger alone never could. In that moment, flying high above the country whose aviation system now carried his family's quiet influence, Marcus understood that sometimes the most important journeys begin with unexpected detours, and that transformation often emerges from the very experiences we would never have chosen, but can learn to navigate with grace, purpose, and the strategic vision to turn individual difficulty into collective progress. Call to action. If this story resonated with you, consider how documentation and strategic response can transform difficult experiences into positive change. Share this video with someone who needs encouragement in facing discrimination or injustice. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of resilience, systematic change, and the power of dignified response to challenging situations. Remember, standing up for what's right doesn't always mean the loudest voice or the most dramatic reaction. Sometimes it means the most strategic documentation, the most patient activation of proper channels, and the most persistent focus on creating improvements that extend beyond personal vindication to benefit everyone. True power isn't in emotional reactions, but in knowing how systems work and having the patience to activate them properly. Your story matters, and how you choose to respond to injustice can create ripples of positive change extending far beyond your individual experience. Don't forget to like this video, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment sharing your own experiences with systemic change. Together, we can transform individual challenges into collective progress.